You could say that. Anyway, I came back to Sissy, but she would not have me. She was angry and refused to let me back into the home. Understandably, said Lawrence, thinking about Catherine. Some men didn't deserve their loyal, faithful wives. So I spent a few nights in a coffee house in Great Charlotte Street. I often went there when Sissy got angry. But my money was running out, and I needed some more. You could have earned it, said Lawrence, feeling little sympathy with Miller and his lack of morals. That's what I was doing, said Miller. I was on my way to see the gangers on George's Dock when I saw a man hanging around the bookstall. Moyes's bookstall? Yes, but Moyes wasn't there. Just one of his half-witted boys. What do you mean when you say the man was hanging around? I mean that he was watching the bookstall from a distance as if he was waiting for someone. What did you do? I walked past him and over to the gangers. There were no jobs left that day. It was too late. So I came back again, and he was still there. Moyes was back at the stall. But the man was still watching. And I knew there was something odd about him. What did he look like? Like Moyes. The same height, with a full beard, but not thin, like Moyes, who always looked like he needed a good meal. I couldn't see much of his face under the beard, and a cloth cap covered his head. He looked like a working man, but didn't speak like one. And he wasn't from around here. You talked to him? Miller nodded. I was curious. So I asked him what he was doing. He went to walk away, but turned back instead and asked if I wanted to earn some money. I questioned him further, and he nodded towards the bookstall and asked whether Moyes and I were acquainted. Were you? Yes. I lodged with Moyes once when Sissy threw me out, and had known him for several years. I passed his bookstall every day when I was working, and we often spoke. What happened next? The man said that Moyes had something belonging to him. I asked what it was, and he said it was a Bible containing a letter. Well, I laughed at him. Moyes is a Bible seller. He has hundreds, but the man said that it wasn't the Bible that was important. It was the letter inside. It was unlikely that Moyes would part with it, so it must be in his house. He asked me if I could retrieve it and offered to pay me well. And you agreed? Of course I agreed. The price was good and it was an easy task. Moyes wouldn't miss the letter, and I knew he would let me into his home. There didn't seem any harm in it. So you went to Red Cross Street? I called in that very evening at about 6 o'clock. Moyes wasn't there, but one of his boys let me in and we talked for a while. He said that his master wasn't due to return until much later, so I left. But on my way back to Great Catherine Street, a further thought occurred to me. The boy might know where Moyes kept his valuables, which could save a great deal of time. So I returned an hour before Moyes was due and spoke with the boy again. He was useless, and said he knew nothing of Moyes's personal affairs. That's why you sat at the table with him? Yes. How did you know? I talked to Needham. Miller spoke without meeting Lawrence's eyes. Has he recovered? Physically, said Lawrence. But he will never be the same. Miller flushed and lowered his head further still. I don't know what came over me. I cannot begin to understand it, said Lawrence. You enter the house to retrieve a letter and come out a murderer, nearly a double murderer, as a point of fact. And I will pay with my life, muttered Miller. What happened to make you risk everything? I panicked. That is all. Why? When Moyes returned, he welcomed me and said I could spend the night on the sofa. His bedroom was on the same floor, and Needham slept in the room above. The boy turned in first, and then Moyes. I waited until he blew out his lamp, and then gave it another half hour. When I was sure that he was asleep, I searched every part of the house. There were Bibles everywhere, but no letters that fitted the description. It was worth a lot of money to me, and I had to find it. So I thought long and hard. The only places I hadn't checked were the bedrooms. It wasn't likely to be in Needham's room, so it ought to be in with Moyes. And it made sense for it to be there, Old people like to keep their valuables close. Agreed, said Lawrence. I suppose he saw you. Was that why you killed him? Miller exhaled loudly. His face contorted in an expression somewhere between anger and shame. Don't ever mention this to anyone else, he growled. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. What? Yes. He found me in his room. I carried a candle because it was pitch black, and I needed to see to search for the Bible. I thought he would not notice the faint illumination. Moyes was snoring and in a deep sleep. It felt safe to continue, but it wasn't. The floor was a mess, with boxes of books stacked on every available space. I nearly tripped over a poker by the fire, then noticed a chest at the end of the room with papers strewn across the top. Not those I was looking for, as it turned out. I crept past his bed and opened a drawer. It creaked. My God, it screeched like the scream of a banshee. I stopped dead and extinguished the candle and waited, barely breathing. Moyes started snoring again. So I made for the door, planning to find a way to divert his attention on the morrow. Then I could search his bedroom in the daylight. But he was only half asleep. He saw me tiptoe past the bed and sat up. And you hit him to stop him crying out? He didn't cry out. Then what did he say? Miller turned his head away. He made a suggestion so revolting, so utterly unexpected and repugnant, that I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Miller's words trailed away as he stared out of the window with a glazed look across his face. What suggestion? I will not say. Miller spat the words out, staccato. It made you angry? So angry that I could not think straight. I grabbed the poker and slammed it on Moyes' head. His skull split open, and blood poured from the wound. He stared at me, whimpering. So I hit him again, and kept hitting him, until he stopped moving. Then I searched through the chest and the boxes and found nothing. Nothing. Without that letter, there would be no money, and I would have killed a man for no reason. Lawrence exhaled and put his hand on his forehead, wondering how he had once assumed Miller's innocence. You might well look disgusted, said Miller. I am. I could stomach it while I was still angry. But not now. His face haunts me. What I did to that man, who had been my friend. He shook his head. Then you attacked the boy. It was not my intention, said Miller. I went to his room to get him out of bed and asked him to go downstairs and cut up some wood for the fire. I searched his room just in case, but couldn't find anything. So I returned downstairs. I passed the loft hatch on the way to the kitchen and realized that I hadn't looked there. Needham wasn't in sight. So I took a chair and my candle and peered inside. I could barely see and felt around the hatch with my bare hand, but there was nothing but dust. Then I heard Needham snigger, and I looked down to see him staring up at me, with a stupid grin on his face. Then his jaw dropped in horror. I jumped from the chair and blew out the candle, but it was too late. Needham had already seen my bloody hands. He dropped the hatchet and ran towards his bedroom. I picked it up and followed him up the stairs, striking a blow that hit him but did not bring him down. He struggled past me and headed back to the kitchen. I couldn't let him go. Couldn't let him live. His head wound had slowed him down, and I caught up with ease. He screamed and begged me not to kill him. There was another poker by the kitchen fire. I hit him over the head with it, and he fell. He cowered in the corner, staring at me and trembling in fear. Then the anger left me as quickly as it had come. The boy did not know me well and was so badly injured that had he survived, he still might not recognize me. I told him to go to Moyes, and that I would not kill him if he did not tell. Then I left.
Thankfully the boy survived, said Lawrence grimly. And you were not discovered immediately. What did you do in the meantime?
I waited at the docks till midday. I'd arranged to meet the stranger there to hand over the goods. He was standing in the same place that I had first encountered him. He saw me and held out his hand for the letter. I told him that I did not have it. There was no document in any Bible in Moyes' home. The man stared at my bloody hands with an expression of disgust and made as if to walk away. I said, "What about my money?" And he said, "You shall not have it." I told him that I had killed Moyes, and he smiled and said that it was as good an outcome as finding the letter and remedied his problem. I asked for my money again, offering to relinquish half, if that was all he was willing to give me. He raised an eyebrow and regarded me with cold eyes, then walked briskly to the other side of the road and boarded a bus before I could regain my composure. I wandered the streets, trying to create an alibi, and you know the rest.
What a waste of a life, said Lawrence. Can you tell me anything more about this man?
Nothing at all.
You said he resembled Moyes. Could he have been related?
No. The resemblance was contrived, and most likely a disguise.
Lawrence nodded.
Quite possibly.
Anything else?
Nothing. I would tell you if I knew more. I have lived a sinful life and made bad choices, but that man has blood on his hands too. My life is over. And he walks free. Find him, and bring him to justice, Mr. Harpham. Let my soul rest in peace.
Chapter 29. The Language of Flowers. Lawrence emerged from Walton Jail into glorious sunshine. The skies were blue and cloudless, and the temperature was warm without being humid. He had only been inside for a bare hour, but it felt like days had passed. Miller was guilty and would justifiably die. Lawrence felt no sympathy for him. He had killed a man in cold blood out of greed, and it was only by God's grace that George Needham had survived. Miller deserved his fate, but he had not acted alone. The bearded man who had sought the letter had blood on his hands by association, and should lose his freedom too. But who was he, and where did he go? Miller had not recognized him, and the description he'd given could have applied to half the men in the country. Lawrence did not know where to start, but of one thing he was certain. He could not face spending the rest of the day in Mrs. Bramwell's lodging-house. He crossed over Hornby Road and made his way back towards the city when a yellow tram, the colour of mustard, pulled up. Lawrence removed his jacket, boarded the tram, and climbed the metal staircase to the top seats with no thought to its destination. After a pleasant journey, the tram came to a halt in the centre of the city, only 10 minutes away from his uncle's house. He briefly considered visiting, but although he felt better, he was still more inclined towards solitude, and decided to go for a walk instead. Wandering east along Ranelagh Street, he was admiring the exterior of the Grand Hotel in front of him when he heard a familiar voice. "Lawrence Harpham, well I never!" He turned to see a slender young woman wearing a burgundy-ribbed silk dress overlaid with white lace and braid trimming. She carried a brown paper parcel and a lace parasol. "Do I know you?" Lawrence said. Then recognition dawned. "Loveday!" he exclaimed. "You are looking well, Lawrence," she said, smiling. "Allow me," he said, taking the parcel from her. "That is very kind, but I am only going to the Adelphi." She pointed to the building that he had been watching. "Aren't you lucky? But what are you doing here, Loveday? I thought you were in India." "I was. It's the first time I have been back from Calcutta in 4 years.
Are you visiting family?
No, my family live mostly abroad now. I'm staying with friends in Cheltenham.
Why are you in Liverpool?
Because that is where my ship docked. You are nosy, Lawrence.
I'm only making conversation, he said tersely.
And I am only teasing, she replied. I'm not expected in Cheltenham for another 2 days. Meanwhile, I am all alone and friendless in this big city.
Well, we can't have that, can we? She smiled as they reached the hotel entrance.
Here we are, then. I'm going inside to freshen up. The Adelphi serves a splendid dinner. You should join me.
Should I?
You know you want to. It will be fun.
Lawrence considered it. Loveday was over 20 years his junior, but breathtakingly assured and masterfully manipulative. He remembered their time together in Fressingfield. She had flirted disgracefully, dropping him the moment she met Dr. Taylor. Not that the young doctor had fared any better in her long-term affections. She'd left him without a backward glance, too. Under any other circumstance, Lawrence would wish her well and walk away. But spending the evening with Loveday was 100 times better than watching paper peel off the damp lodging-house walls. "Why not?" he said.
"Meet me at 6, she commanded, holding her hand out for a kiss. Lawrence obliged. "Haven't you forgotten something?" she asked.
"Ah, yes, your parcel."
"It's a silk shawl," she said.
"Only the best for you." He could not help but flatter her. She was, if anything, more beautiful than when he last saw her at the vicarage all those years ago. But flirting with Loveday was like teasing a cobra with a stick. He was living dangerously, yet he continued to wave at her as she walked past the doorman and into the hotel lobby. Lawrence whistled as he walked away from the Adelphi. He waited until Loveday was out of sight, then checked his pocket watch. 2 hours to kill until their meal. There wasn't enough time to go back to Rawcliffe Road, even if he had wanted to. Instead, he opted to wander around the city centre, calling into a flower shop where he inquired about purchasing a bouquet. The flower girl was alarmingly direct.
"For a young lady, is it, sir?"
"Yes," he said cautiously.
"Your intended?"
"No, the lady is a friend."
"A particular friend?"
"Just a friend, nothing more." The girl smiled knowingly.
"If you say so, sir, might I recommend a tussie-mussy?"
"What kind of flower is that?"
"It's a nosegay, sir, a posy. Flowers arranged together with aromatic herbs, like this." She thrust a small arrangement towards him, and the sweet scent of lavender drifted through the air. "That will do," he said. "But I haven't told you what it means."
"I beg your pardon?"
"The language of flowers."
Lawrence sighed, wondering whether to leave. The simple purchase was becoming unnecessarily complicated. "What does it mean?"
"True love,"
she said, holding her hand over her heart. "Not that one, then," he said quickly. "Do all women know this floral code?"
"Many of them."
"Then it makes buying flowers a dangerous thing. How is a man supposed to know what sentiment he is portraying?" The girl laughed.
"That is why you need an experienced florist."
"Tell me what to choose."
"Do you like this girl?"
"Of course I like her. Why would I buy flowers if I didn't?"
"I mean, really like her."
"I've told you the young lady is a friend that I haven't seen in a long time." The flower girl watched as a red flush settled across Lawrence's cheeks.
"Here,"
she said, selecting a spray of yellow flowers from a water-filled trough. She teased them expertly into a small posy and passed them to Lawrence.
"Primrose and rue,"
she said. "What does that mean?"
"Friendship,"
said the girl, crossing her fingers behind her back. "Ideal," said Lawrence. He paid her and left the shop. She smiled as she watched him walk away, hoping that she had done the right thing. Despite her youth, Verity Naylor had been working with flowers and lovesick men for a long time. She understood them better than they understood themselves.
She hoped the young lady concerned would appreciate the pretty yellow nosegay and its underlying message: eternal love with a trace of regret. Lawrence had always adhered to an exacting standard of dress. He was smart by nature, whether working or socializing. So although he had visited the jail that day, his attire was still acceptable for dining in a high-class hotel. He arrived at the Adelphi, handed his coat to the doorman, and found a nearby gentleman's convenience. There he straightened his bow tie and checked his jacket for dust and hairs. He nodded at his reflection, satisfied that nothing was out of place, and proceeded to the reception hall. 3 smartly dressed hotel staff were sitting behind a long counter. As he approached, 2 of them stood and offered to help, almost competing to be the most useful. Lawrence asked for Loveday, and the shorter of the 2 men directed him to a small seating area with comfortable sofas in which to recline. But he was in no mood for sitting, and paced the small room. Now and then he examined his reflection in a mirror conveniently set above an empty fireplace. He had only been waiting a short time, though it felt a lot longer, when Loveday appeared. She was a vision of beauty, clad in a blue satin dress with a scooped neck and a shaped waist that accentuated her graceful figure. She beckoned him from the doorway, and as he walked towards her, she turned away. He followed her across the reception hall and into an opulent sitting room with a long bar down the side. She sat on a leather sofa and patted the seat beside her. "Sit down," she said. A waiter appeared in front of them before Lawrence had a chance to reply. "What drinks can I get for sir and madam?" he asked. Loveday grinned. "What would you recommend?" "A cocktail, perhaps?" said the waiter. "Oh, yes. Choose one for me." "As you wish. What would you like to drink, sir?" "I would like a brandy," said Lawrence. "Don't put anything in it." The waiter nodded and proceeded in the direction of the bar. "Are they for me?" asked Loveday. Lawrence looked at the posy in his hand. "Of course," he said. "Sorry, the waiter distracted me." He presented the flowers to Loveday. "They smell beautiful," she said, placing them on the table in front. "I like it here," she continued. "It's a pity I have to get on a rotten old train on Wednesday." "It won't take long." "But I have to change at Crewe," she said, her mouth set in a downward turn. "Still, it could be worse. At least I'm travelling first class." Lawrence thought about his rail journey between Bury and Liverpool. He had been perfectly comfortable in second class, and it had not occurred to him to travel otherwise. "I suppose someone will meet you at the other end?" he asked. "Naturally," said Loveday. "I'm staying in Pitfall Circus Road with my school friend and her family. They will send a carriage." "Then I'm sure your journey will not be too arduous," he assured her. "You may even enjoy it." The waiter returned with 2 drinks on a silver salver. "A white lady for you, madam," he said, placing the glass on the table in front, "and your brandy, sir." Loveday raised her glass and clinked it against Lawrence's. "Your very good health," she said, sipping the delicate cocktail. "Delicious." Another drink followed before they made their way into the dining room. They sat at a table for 2 and shared a bottle of wine over a 3-course dinner, a sumptuous and no doubt expensive dinner, the cost of which Lawrence had already considered. The next stop after the flower shop had been the bank, where he had withdrawn a sizable sum. Though Lawrence had known the meal wouldn't be cheap, nothing had prepared him for the size of the bill when it arrived. He swallowed and carefully peeled several high-denomination notes from his wallet, hoping that there would be enough to cover the cost. He already regretted not drawing a more substantial sum earlier and had just enough money to save him from embarrassment. But the thought of explaining the extravagance to Violet left him cold. He would have to replace it with cash from his resources rather than count it as a business expense. Loveday was blissfully unaware of all these concerns as Lawrence smiled at the waiter and paid with the confidence of a man of means. "What now?" asked Loveday as they rose from the dinner table. "Would you like to take a walk?" asked Lawrence. Loveday snorted. "It's only 9 o'clock, and we have the whole night ahead of us. I would like to do something more exciting than that." "The whole night?" Lawrence echoed, taken aback. His plans had gone no further than the end of the meal, and the idea of the redoubtable Mrs. Bramwell and his 10:30 curfew did not appeal. "Well, I have nothing better to do," said Loveday. "Have you?" Lawrence shook his head and held out his arm. Loveday took it, and they left the Adelphi Hotel, strolling in a northerly direction. "Look," said Loveday, pointing towards a grand neoclassical building ahead in the distance. "I think that's a concert hall. Shall we take a look?" They drew nearer and joined the crowd of people making their way up the stone steps and through the columns beneath the portico. "There is a concert," said Loveday. "Let's go inside." "I must get back," said Lawrence. "Don't be silly. You have all night." I don't," he began to say before realizing that any further protestation would mean that he had to disclose the reason why. Lawrence could not bring himself to tell Loveday that he was spending the night in a low-lodging establishment with a curfew. He swallowed and decided to go inside and take whatever fate decided to throw at him. The concert turned out to be an organ recital given by a talented young musician. Even so, Lawrence was ambivalent to the performance and preoccupied with his watch. Loveday seemed equally distracted, chatting to Lawrence at inappropriate moments. She earned a series of pointed glances from ladies nearby to whom she appeared oblivious. It was 11 o'clock by the time they returned to the Adelphi. "Are you coming inside?" asked Loveday. "No," said Lawrence. "I must return to Bury tomorrow. I'm only here on business." "I know, you said. Your work sounds thrilling. I will visit your office one day." Lawrence smiled. He had told Loveday about some of his more interesting cases over dinner, and it was fair to say that he'd exaggerated a little. "It's not as exciting as you might think," he said. "My cases are rather dull and routine most of the time." "Don't go back then," said Loveday. "Spend tomorrow with me. Then you can come to the railway station and see me off on Wednesday morning." "Absolutely not," said Lawrence. "At least come and see me tomorrow," she said plaintively. "I can't." "Why not? Who are you rushing back for?" Lawrence opened his mouth to explain, then realized he hadn't told her about Violet. Not a word. Loveday had no idea that Violet was his business partner. He had not revealed that they were still acquainted, nor that they had recently returned from a holiday together. Lawrence idly wondered why he hadn't thought to mention it, then dismissed the idea. His friendship with Violet wasn't relevant, and he could tell Loveday another time. Tomorrow, perhaps. "I will come for you at midday," said Lawrence eventually. "Think of somewhere you would like to visit, and I will take you there." Loveday beamed. He took her hand and kissed it gently. Then she waved goodbye and disappeared through the door of the Adelphi Hotel. Lawrence tightened his bow tie, then proceeded down Ranelagh Street, wondering where he was going to find a bed for the night. Chapter 30. The Spring Fair. Wednesday, May 22nd, 1895. "Cheer up!" Michael patted Violet's hand encouragingly. "It's a beautiful day. See the children enjoying themselves." Violet raised a weak smile. The maypole was still standing from earlier May Day celebrations, and 3 little girls weaved coloured ribbons around the pole as they danced. The spring fair was busy with many of the town's inhabitants outside enjoying the festivities. There were chairs and blankets spread across the grass. Trestle tables groaned under the weight of cakes and sandwiches, all provided by the town's tradesmen. The spring fair was free, and all from the wealthy to the most impoverished families were made welcome. Michael and Violet had chosen chairs overlooking the mere. The sun was out, and there was no trace of a breeze. The mere was peaceful and serene, which was more than could be said of Violet. "Where is he, Michael?" she asked for the 3rd time that day. He has vanished off the face of the earth." "You know where he is," said Michael reassuringly. "He sent a telegram. That was days ago. And I have sent another since," said Violet. "To Annie, and she hasn't heard from him either. So I sent a telegram to Frederick Harpham, and what do you think?" "I can't imagine," said Michael, as if she hadn't already told him. "He hasn't seen him, not once, since his first visit. So where is he, and more importantly, is he safe and well?" "Lawrence has 9 lives," said Michael. "You know that." Violet glowered. "He nearly died last time." "I know." Michael patted her hand. "But he isn't doing anything dangerous. He's visiting a jail, where there are guards to keep an eye on him. You don't need to worry." Violet sighed, then smiled as she saw Joseph Pope and Arthur Thompson in the distance. She waved, and both men doffed their hats before disappearing into a canvas tent trimmed with yellow and red bunting. "They are running the tea tent," said Violet. "Would you like a cup?" "Yes, let's go inside," said Michael, glad of the opportunity to distract Violet from her worries. The front and sides of the large tent were open to take full advantage of the evening sun. Rows of benches were half full of people enjoying a fine array of cakes. Violet sat down while Michael collected the teas. He returned carrying a plate of scones. Violet pulled one apart and buttered it moodily. "Jam?" asked Michael, pushing a small dish of preserve towards her. She accepted and spooned a little onto her scone, smiling again at the men by the tea-urn. 6 oddfellows, dressed in full regalia, were standing with Joseph and Arthur. She recognized one as George Fairweather, who she'd met on her first visit to Dis. "Their altruism is commendable," she said. "Very kind men." "All lodges encourage charity," said Michael, "Masonic or otherwise." "I didn't know that until I met Francis," said Violet. "I thought these organizations were men's clubs, more for socializing than anything else." The conversation ground to a halt as Michael finished his scone, and Violet watched the mere in front of them through far-away eyes. "How are you getting on with your investigation?" he asked, snapping her out of her reverie. "I've ground to a halt," she confessed. "Lawrence asked me to get a list of all women old enough to be the writer of the Scole Confession." "I didn't think you knew much about her." "We don't." "Then how do you know what age she is?" "Oh, I see. Well, we made certain assumptions. The writer referred to Fanny Nunn, who died almost 20 years ago, and she would have been well into her majority then, but probably older still. So I've drawn up a list of females aged 50 or over who died between 1887 and 1892. Why those years? Because William Jackson said that Moyes went to Liverpool in 1892, and we know he left the Antipodes in 1887. It's quite a tidy time frame." "Yes, that makes sense," said Michael. "Then you have made progress." "Not really." Violet looked glumly at the list that she had retrieved from her bag. "I've only noted entries from St. Mary's. We realized soon after that the writer could have died in one of the other villages, or she could have been a Catholic, Methodist or Baptist. Any denomination, really. We realized we were chasing our tails and gave up." "That's a shame. I can help if you like. It's not such a big task when you consider that you only need records for 5 years." "I suppose so. It couldn't do any harm." "Show me what you have written." Violet passed her notebook to Michael and finished off the last of her scone while he read. After a few moments, he looked up at her with a frown. "Have you looked closely at this?" "Not since I wrote it." "There are an awful lot of deaths from drowning." "Yes, I noticed that. But Lawrence and I have dealt with coastal cases, and there are always more drownings in villages by the sea. I suppose it's the same for any large body of water." "No. The sea is tidal and dangerous. Ships are not always seaworthy or men get washed overboard. There are many reasons why drownings are more prevalent by the coast. The mere is still and quiet. There shouldn't be the same number of deaths associated with it at all." Violet pulled the book towards her and looked again. "I see what you mean." she said. Yes. I will look further into it. I'll go to St. Mary's again tomorrow and recheck the register. Perhaps I'll collect records back to the year of Fanny's death. She was about to elaborate when Harry Aldrich walked up to their table and clapped Michael on the back. "Good to see you again, Vicar," he said. Michael stood and shook his hand. "Splendid weather for the fair," he replied. "It seems to be going very well indeed." "Yes, we couldn't have asked for a finer day. Now, my little boy William is outside and about to race his young playmates on their hobby horses. I must go outside and cheer him on." "I can't miss that," said Michael, rising to join him. "Are you coming, Violet?" Violet shook her head and continued reading through the list of names. Michael was right about the drownings. The number was unnaturally high, and she had been dimly aware, but not enough to react. Michael's comment had solidified her concerns. She would ask Lawrence's opinion as soon as she managed to track him down. Chapter 31. Trapped. Thursday, May 23rd, 1895. Lawrence Harpham was the first thing on Violet's mind when she woke the next morning. The second was the unexplained presence of a note by the door of her bedroom. She peered at it with unfocused eyes, then sat up to see if it became more explicable when viewed from a different angle. Finally, she got out of bed, padded over to the door, and picked it up. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, with Violet's name scrawled on the front in block capitals. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in green ink. It read, "Meet me at the disused house by the Baptist Church in Denmark Street. I have some information that may help you in your quest. Come at 2 o'clock. Tell no one." Violet bit her lip as she scrutinized the paper. If the writer of the note thought that she would go wandering into an empty house without mentioning it to anyone else, he didn't know her at all. She was far too intelligent to do anything that foolish. But clearly somebody had gone to a lot of trouble to make contact, and there must be a reason. She decided to follow the lead in the safest possible way. She would tell Michael and make sure that he was nearby and in a position to watch over her in case of trouble. She dressed quickly and decided not to bother with breakfast. Her appetite had vanished over the last few days, and she preferred to make an early start at St. Mary's instead. She located the vicar and sat quietly copying death dates for the women of the parish from the years 1875 until 1887. These, together with the record she already possessed, gave her almost 20 years' worth of information. Then, glad that she'd had the foresight to wear flat-heeled boots, she embarked on the long walk to Michael's parish church in Friends. She arrived at St. Andrew's a little after 11:30, out of breath and very warm. The tiny church, surrounded by stone pillars and wrought-iron railings, stood at the end of a long footpath. The sun was high, and the grass was beginning to dry out after several days without rain. She walked inside and found Michael sitting in the vestry, writing in a large register. "Violet, I wasn't expecting you." "No, sorry. I need your help." Michael closed the heavy book. "I was planning to spend today on church matters," he said ruefully. "I know. I am sorry to have kept you away from your work so often. You will be glad when I have gone." "No, I won't," he sighed. "But I am busy today. Can it wait?" Violet shook her head. "No, it can't. Look." She thrust the note towards him. "You're not going, are you?" She nodded. "It's a terrible idea, Violet. It is either a hoax or dangerous. Either way, you shouldn't be doing it." "I must, don't you see? Something is going on around here. Some days I can't be sure if there is a problem, and other days it is staring me in the face. Today is one of them. If I don't go and find out what this man has to say, I will regret it." "Man?" "I assume a man wrote it." "Doesn't it say?" "No." "Perhaps it's from a woman, then." "That would be safer." "None of it is safe, Violet. Please don't go." "I hoped you would come with me." "I will,
if you insist on this ill-advised meeting, but I doubt whoever it is will make an appearance if I'm with you.
No, I must go alone.
But you could hide within sight of the house. Then I will meet them, and if I don't return within a quarter of an hour, you can come and find me.
Michael sighed.
And if I say no?
Whoever wrote that note will be there at 2 o'clock. It's my only chance to find out what they want and whether it connects to this case.
So you will go with or without me?
Violet nodded. I must.
Michael sighed and looked at the clock on the vestry wall. We had better be on our way, he said, getting to his feet. And when Lawrence does reappear from wherever he has gone, he will be getting a bill for my time. The disused house in Denmark Road was an unprepossessing property which had lain unloved for a long time. The door was intact, but grime caked the window panes, masking the view inside. Violet knocked on the peeling door, and it creaked open. She stepped cautiously inside, treading on rotten, squeaky floorboards peppered with wormholes. The smell of rising damp hung heavily in the hallway, and paint was peeling from the walls. Though warm outside, the house was unnaturally cold. Violet called out in an uncertain voice, "Hello?
Is anyone there?"
She stood silently, listening for a reply, but none came. Then she ventured further inside and through the door at the end of the hallway, taking care to leave the front door open. The inner door hung uselessly from one hinge, allowing a partial view into the kitchen beyond. Violet squeezed past the door, hoping not to dislodge it from its precarious position, and called out again. Silence descended until she heard a rustling, a scrabbling sound which seemed to be coming from the floorboards. Violet surveyed the dingy kitchen. The only illumination came from a hole in the broken glass window by the rear door. She peered through the gloom and examined the floor again, but there was nothing untoward. Violet waited, hardly breathing. Then the noise began once more, and this time it came from under the sink. Biting her lip, she tiptoed towards a filthy linen curtain slung between two nails. She lifted the corner. A half-starved rat with a torn ear stared at her through dead eyes. Her gasp disturbed its scavenging, and it slunk furtively away while she stopped and clutched her heart, hoping to calm her breathing. Violet's fingers shook as she counted aloud, trying to distract her fears and steady her nerves and pulse. After a few moments, she felt able to carry on, frightened but secure in the knowledge that Michael was only a short distance away and would hear if she screamed. Taking a deep breath, she turned towards the inner doorway by the stairs. She was about to ascend when the front door slammed shut with a force so shocking that it took her a few moments to comprehend what had happened. She ran towards the hallway, nudging the inner door, which spun off its hinge and crashed to the floor, hitting her shoulder as it fell. The force of the impact propelled Violet forwards onto her knees, and as she knelt there with dust and debris coating her long skirt, something bright dropped through the letterbox and fell onto a damp patch by the door that she hadn't noticed earlier. It hit the floor, and the area ignited with a roar as flames blazed along the hallway and straight towards Violet. She gathered her skirts and ran ahead of the fire into the kitchen and towards the rear door. She tugged the brass doorknob with both hands, rattling the glass with her efforts, and the doorknob came away in her hands. She looked over her shoulder to see the hallway aflame and thick smoke billowing into the kitchen. Violet could hear Michael shouting outside the front door. He must have seen what happened, but was unable to gain access. She scanned the kitchen. The window with the broken pane was tiny, and she would never fit through. But there was another oddly shaped window set higher up the wall. She might be able to squeeze through if she could reach it before the smoke overwhelmed her. For the second time that day, she thanked her lucky stars for sensible boots.
She headed for the chipped and stained fireclay sink set beneath the window with its solitary brass tap listing drunkenly to one side. She pushed down on it, testing her weight as pieces of plaster crumbled around her. The fire had not yet entered the kitchen, but the smoke was acrid. Violet coughed uncontrollably before ripping a piece of decorative satin from her bodice to cover her mouth. The unsteady sink was the only thing standing between escape and imminent death from smoke inhalation. She would have to take a chance and hope it stayed fixed to the wall. She gulped a deep breath through her satin mask before plunging the material into her pocket and hauled herself onto the wobbling sink. It tilted to the side as she grabbed the narrow window ledge and fought to balance. Holding tight with one trembling hand, she edged the other towards her pocket, retrieved the satin, and wrapped it around her knuckles. Then she slammed her hand into the window, punching blindly above. The brittle glass exploded, scattering shards into her hair. Violet grimaced as she cleared loose pieces of glass from the window frame with her barely protected hand as blood poured from deep gouges. Then she lunged for the opening, kicking against the sink, which fell from the wall with an almighty crash. With her head hanging from the window, Violet hauled herself free of the kitchen and tumbled to the garden below. She was still lying in a heap, winded and bloody, lungs screaming for air, when Michael hurtled into the garden and fell on his knees beside her. "Stand up," he said urgently. "Violet, stand up now." She coughed as her muscles began to relax and gulped the air. "Come on, stand up. You're too close to the house." She lifted her head and gazed at the building. Flames licked at the edges of the windowsill from where she had fallen. Michael reached out his hand. "Come on!" He grabbed her and pulled her off the ground. She winced as glass shards pressed further into her wounds, but said nothing and limped towards the open yard behind the house. "Quickly!" Michael pulled her behind him, and they were a bare 20 yards away when the house exploded and flaming tiles tumbled from the roof. The door of the adjoining house opened, and a couple ran towards the safety of the road. By the time they reached Denmark Street, the townsmen were already forming a line towards the mere, while women fetched pails from their homes. Violet slumped on the roadside, unwrapped the satin from her hand, and examined her wounds. "Stay here," said Michael. "I'm fetching the doctor." Violet was too tired and shocked to argue. She lay there, panting, as a kindly woman placed a cup of warm milk into her hand. She sipped it and waited for Michael to return. In 5 minutes he reappeared and waited while the doctor took her to the nearest house to clean her hand and make a private examination of her wounds. "How is she?" Michael asked as soon as the doctor returned. "I have dressed and cleaned her hands," he said. "Any broken bones? I don't know. She wouldn't let me check." "Let him help," pleaded Michael. "There is no need." Violet insisted. "I'm only a little nauseous, and I felt like that for days. It's got nothing to do with the fire." "You're not a doctor. You could have a concussion." "I fell on my back," she said, "and I did not hit my head. Please don't make a fuss." "Talking of making a fuss," said Michael as a uniformed man came into view. The man approached Violet. "Are you responsible for this?" he asked, nodding towards the fire. She opened her mouth, but he did not give her time to respond. "You're coming to the police house with me, and you're going to tell me exactly what happened." Chapter 32. Murder in the Mere. Friday, May 24th, 1895. Violet reached her hat from the top of the wardrobe, wincing as a muscle in her back spasmed. The hat dropped to the floor and she lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, staring at her bandaged hands dejectedly. She ached all over, mostly from tiredness and the shock of winding herself when she'd fallen. Her injuries were confined mainly to cuts and grazes, though she still felt nauseous. But worse than her physical condition was the feeling of utter abandonment. Lawrence had been away for a whole week and should have returned to Dis on Tuesday. Here she was 3 days later suffering the after-effects of an attack, and he hadn't bothered to contact her to explain himself. She was both angry and worried. Violet reached forward for the fallen hat and placed it on top of her case, then opened the wardrobe door and rechecked for any forgotten garments. She was leaving Dis today at Michael's insistence. He had accompanied her to the police house, listening while she gave the constable a sketchy account of her actions. When asked why Violet had been in the abandoned property, she'd prevaricated as much as possible. The constable was not amused, but would have been even less impressed had Violet elaborated on her reasons for being in Dis. If Lawrence had been with her, she might have stayed. There was safety in numbers and, more importantly, it brought confidence. She felt tired and out of her depth. Michael had been an enormous support, but she knew she was taking up too much of his time and was fast becoming a nuisance. Whatever mysteries remained in Dis, they were not worth the way she felt today. Violet dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief monogrammed with a lilac V. Then, remembering that her old and much-loved former employer had given it to her one birthday, she let out an involuntary sob. A tear trickled down her cheek and more followed, streaming down her face and plopping into her lap. She put her hand to her forehead and shook her head. "What's wrong with me today?" she whispered. "Enough." She stood and shoved her damp handkerchief into her case and closed it with a snap, then looked in the mirror and repinned an unruly curl. "Control yourself," she said under her breath. Then, standing tall, she exhaled before striding towards the bedroom door, bag in hand. Minnie Panks was emerging from the dining room as Violet lugged the case down the stairs. "You needn't have done that, miss," she said. "I wanted to," Violet replied. She wasn't an invalid and was getting fed up of the constant attention since the attack. "You'll be wanting a good breakfast after all your troubles yesterday," said Minnie. Violet sighed. She wasn't hungry for the third day running, but it was easier to dine than engage in a debate with the good-natured and well-intentioned serving girl. "Go and sit down, and I'll bring you a nice pot of tea." Violet obeyed, hoping that Minnie would ask her what she wanted for breakfast. A few days ago, Minnie had plonked a large plate of cooked food in front of her without asking. Violet might manage a small bowl of porridge, but anything else was beyond her. She waited quietly, too tired to read her book, then involuntarily jumped when she heard shouting from outside the building. Violet cocked her head and listened. Multiple voices were speaking excitedly, too distant for her to hear what they were saying. She considered walking into the passageway to find out what was going on, but was too tired to move and remained where she was. Her solitude did not last long. Minnie rushed into the room, slamming a tray onto the dining table and sloshing the contents of the teapot over the lace mat on which it stood. "God blast me!" she exclaimed, slipping into a stronger version of her usual Norfolk accent. "Oh dear, oh dear!" She waved her hand across her face as if to cool herself. "Whatever is it?" asked Violet, temporarily distracted from her problems. "It's a body, miss. Another body in the mirror." Violet gasped. "Who is it?" "I don't know. They didn't say." "I must go. But you haven't had your tea." "Sorry, Minnie. You drink it." Violet left the dining room and rushed out of the Crown, heading down St. Nicholas Street towards Market Hill. She was not alone. A large group of people surged towards the Mere. She turned into Mere Street, where she saw two men walking against the direction of the crowd. They were Harry Aldrich and Joseph Pope. Harry's face glowed red, and he clenched his jaw, doffing his hat without smiling. "Have you seen Henry Garrard?" he asked. "Sorry, no," said Violet. "Damn the man!" Harry scowled, his usual mild manner replaced with an impatient snarl. "Steady," said Joseph, patting him on the arm. "What's happened?" asked Violet, wondering at the change in the two men. Harry was furious, and Joseph looked as if he was about to cry. "He's dead," said Joseph. "Who?" "Robert Moore. They dragged his body from the Mere earlier. The surgeon's there now, and he's asked for the coroner." "The coroner?" Joseph took a deep breath before continuing. "Yes, he's checked the body. It wasn't an accident. Robert was murdered." Violet was nursing a mug of tea in the market room of the Crown Hotel when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around, nerves still frayed from the events of the last few days. "You're looking well," said a familiar voice. She glanced up to see the tall figure of Lawrence Harpham smiling down at her. "You think I look well?" she exclaimed, raising her bandaged hands. The smile fell from his face. "Good Lord, Violet, what happened?" "Never mind what happened. Where on earth have you been?" Lawrence sighed and pulled a wooden chair from the table opposite. He turned it towards her, sat down, and reached for her hand. "No." Violet snatched her arm away and glared at him. "Don't be angry, Violet." "Well, I am. You could have been dead in a ditch for all I knew." "I wasn't." "Then where did you go and why did you take so long? I couldn't even reach you by telegram."
"It was wrong of me. I should have made contact."
"Then why didn't you?"
Lawrence shifted uncomfortably in his seat. There were two reasons why he hadn't been in touch with Violet. One was Catherine, and the other, Loveday. He could explain the former, but even he did not understand his compulsion to keep Loveday company for the best part of a week, and now that he was back in Norfolk, she did not occupy his thoughts at all. He felt ashamed of his treatment of Violet, and relieved that Loveday would be going back to India when she left Cheltenham. He decided there was no need to mention her to Violet, and cleared his throat. "I found out a little more about Catherine," he said. Violet's face softened.
"What did you learn?"
"That there was clear evidence of arson, but it disappeared. And without the proof, there was no case to answer. That is the reason William Clark kept it from me."
"Poor Lawrence. What evidence?"
"Spent matches. They were there one day and not the next."
"There were many?"
"Enough to be sure."
"What will you do?"
"Nothing. What can I do?" Violet shook her head.
"So you went to Liverpool?"
"Yes, I saw Miller. He told me what he did to Moyes."
Violet leaned forward and put her bandaged hands on her knees. "What did he say?" "What on earth happened to you?"
Lawrence leaned forward and picked up her hand. This time, she let it rest in his.
"There was a fire."
Lawrence stared at her, eyes wide. The colour drained from his face.
"Don't worry,"
she said sympathetically. She had always understood Lawrence's fear of fire and the depth of loss he had suffered from it. "I was never in any real danger. I should have been there," he said. "Tell me about it." She gave him a sanitized version, one where she was unafraid and escape had been easy. He gazed at her with soft blue eyes, brows knitted in concern. He did not look convinced. "I've let you down," he said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing her fingertips.
She shook her head. "You weren't to know. How could you?"
"Do you know who set the fire?"
"No."
"But there's one person it couldn't have been." Lawrence tilted his head and looked at her quizzically.
"Haven't you heard?"
"I came straight from the station and haven't spoken to anyone."
"They pulled Robert Moore from the Mere this morning."
Lawrence whistled. "An accident?"
"Apparently not."
"Do I know him?"
Violet glared. "You spent half an hour with him in this hotel on the first day you arrived."
"Ah, yes, with Aldrich and Pope. He seemed like a nice fellow."
"He was. And now he's dead." Violet shuddered. Death by drowning. A horrible way to go.
"It must be an accident, though."
"Not according to the coroner. And he should know with all the other recent drownings."
"Other drownings?" Lawrence raised an eyebrow.
"Yes,"
said Violet, rummaging for her notebook.
"I copied down the burial records for St. Mary's and noted any unnatural deaths. There have been 8 drownings since 1874.
"That's not a particularly high number over 2 decades, said Lawrence.
"It is when you consider that it's only relative to women of a certain age who died in St. Mary's Parish."
"I see. In that case, we ought to check every death record. It's an important detail. Well done, Violet."
"We still don't know what is going on, though. There is no evidence to prove a crime ever happened."
"We do know. I will go into detail another time, but Edward Moyes died because of the Scole confession."
"That's only our assumption."
"No. Miller confirmed it,
A stranger paid him to locate the letter, no doubt to conceal the identity of the writer. Had he succeeded, Moyes would still be alive and we would be none the wiser. Where is the letter now? It could be anywhere. It's not at Moyes' house in Redcross Street, I checked. But what can we do? Lawrence shrugged. We can get more records, but the detail is important. A drowning alone is not evidence of foul play. And we need to find out who wrote the confession. Is it linked to these deaths? We still have much to learn. Violet nodded. If you hadn't arrived today, you would have missed me altogether, she said. Staying seemed pointless, and I'm glad you were here. Violet smiled and released her hand. We must see this through, or someone will get away with murder. Chapter 33. The Printworks. Saturday, May 25th, 1895. Lawrence knocked on the door of the coroner's office for the third time, then slammed his palm against a wooden panel. He isn't in no matter how many times you try, said Violet, reasonably. It's frustrating, said Lawrence. It's Saturday, Violet retorted. You will have to wait until Monday now. Lawrence opened his mouth to snap a reply when he saw a familiar figure ahead. His frown changed to a smile and he waved. It's Michael. Michael strode out towards them, and Lawrence thrust his hand out. Michael faltered, and for an awful moment Violet thought he might refuse the handshake. But good manners and his position in the church got the better of him. Good to see you at last, he said. Where have you been? In Liverpool. For a whole week? Yes. It's none of my business, said Michael abruptly. I suppose Violet has told you what happened to her. She did, and it sounds like she handled herself magnificently. She nearly died, Lawrence, trapped like a rat in a cage. Violet glared at Michael, and he stopped, surprised at her demeanour. I didn't realize it was that serious, said Lawrence. Well, it was. Michael was in no mood to spare his feelings. What brings you here? He continued. We were hoping to see Mr. Garrod, said Violet, about the list of unnatural deaths. Why? For further clarity, said Lawrence, speaking before Violet could answer. We need to know the exact circumstance of the deaths, to know if they are suspicious. You'll have to wait until Monday, said Michael. We know, said Lawrence uncertainly. In all the years he had known Michael, the younger man had always been friendly. His attitude today was curt, and his anger barely concealed. Lawrence already regretted his behaviour well enough without criticism from his friends. Or if you can't wait until then, go and see Edward Abbott. Who? Abbott, the owner of the local printworks. Michael pointed to a large building further up Mere Street. I've just walked past the print shop, and it's open. How will that help? Asked Lawrence. An excellent idea, said Violet, clapping her hands together. At least some of the deaths will have made it into the newspapers. Oh, that type of printworks, said Lawrence, enlightened. Edward Abbott has produced the Dis Express since the 1860s, Michael explained. I expect he keeps back copies. Thank you, said Lawrence, holding out his hand again. We will speak soon. Michael nodded in full comprehension of his meaning. Until then, he said. Lawrence opened the door to the printworks to find an entrance hall with a long counter running almost the entire width of the room. An open doorway behind the worktop allowed a glimpse of the heavy printing press which creaked and groaned beyond. A young man dressed in work clothes and a leather apron was standing behind the counter, squinting at a sheet of writing. He lifted his glasses and looked again before shaking his head in frustration. Lawrence coughed, and the man looked up. Can I help you? He asked, placing the paper into an overflowing wooden tray. Do you keep old copies of your newspapers? Asked Lawrence. Of course. We hold copies of every paper that ever went to press. Can I view them? Not today, it's far too busy. We are only open because of the extra print run. No time for anything else. Violet flashed a smile. That's a lot to get through, she said, gesturing to the tray. Must you finish it today? Most of it, if I want to keep my job, said the young man. This is the most important one of all, he continued, brandishing a sheet of heavy cream paper covered in tiny handwriting. I would stand half a chance of completing it if I could only read Henry's scrawl. Can I see? Asked Violet. He hesitated, then passed it to her, and she peered at the page. "Pass me that pencil," Violet commanded, pointing to a pot on the desk and a piece of paper. He handed her the items, and she marked the document with neat, precise strokes and passed it back again. "You sure that's what it says?" he asked, scrutinizing the page. She nodded. "Once you know shorthand, any writing style becomes easier to read." "I didn't know you'd learned shorthand," said Lawrence. "There's a lot you don't know about me." Violet smiled towards the young man again. "Is Mr. Abbott available?" "Not yet. He might come by later." "And what's your name?" "Charles. I am Mr. Abbott's apprentice compositor." "I see," said Violet. "So it's your job to set the lettering for the press?" He nodded. "Yes. I must produce 200 characters an hour, which isn't difficult as long as I can read the original document. Most of them are readable, but anything from Henry, well, I don't know why he can't make his writing bigger. It's my first time alone, and I don't want to let Mr. Abbott down." "Perhaps we can help each other," said Violet. "Why don't you let us see the back copies of the newspapers, and we'll sit quietly out of your way. You won't even know we're there. Then if you have any problems with Henry's writing, you can ask me for help. How does that sound?" Charles pondered the offer. "I don't see that it can do any harm," he said. "Come through." They followed him into the printworks, which smelled of paper and chemicals. Heavy wooden presses and compositors' cabinets filled the room. A desk had been set directly below the large window, and a composing stick full of letters was lying next to a handwritten design for a sales pamphlet. "I'll be working here," said Charles, pointing to the desk, "and the door to the paper room is through here." He opened another door into a well-lit room which was sparsely furnished apart from a desk, 2 chairs, and a gaslight. A large window dominated one end of the room, and chunky wooden shelves, stacked with binders, covered the adjoining wall. "Don't come outside if you hear any voices," said Charles. "I'm not sure what Mr. Abbott would have to say about this." "We won't," promised Violet, as she sat at the desk. The door closed, and Lawrence moved the second chair opposite her. "Where should we start?" he asked. Violet retrieved her list and pushed it across the table. "I have written an asterisk by the suspicious deaths," she said. "You locate the binders, and I'll make a start." Lawrence nodded and reached for the first weighty tome, then maneuvered it on the desk in front of Violet. She blew a layer of dust away, then located her handkerchief and wiped the residue. "It's been a while since anyone's read that," said Lawrence, unnecessarily, pulling down another binder. Silence fell upon the reading room, save for the rustle of pages as they both examined the newspapers. 10 minutes later, they had found nothing of note. Deep sighs from Lawrence punctuated the rustling pages. Patience was not one of his virtues. After another 10 minutes, he considered leaving the printworks and forgetting all about it, when an article caught his eye. He was halfway through reading it when Violet spoke. "There," she said, pointing to a dog-eared newspaper dated April 1885. "What have you found?" he asked. "A suspicious death. It wasn't from drowning," said Violet, "but I marked it with an asterisk, and having read the report, it's certainly questionable." "Who died?" "Susan Reynolds," she replied. "Her husband found her dead in the washhouse. She was laying by the mangle and had fallen and injured her head." "It doesn't sound very suspicious to me." "But she was in perfectly good health. There was nothing wrong with her at all. The coroner ruled it natural causes because he could find no evidence of disease." "She could have lost her balance." "I suppose so. But the paper describes the wound on Susan's head as severe." "Mark it as possible if you like," said Lawrence, "but I'm not convinced. This one is worth checking further, though," he continued, poring over the page. "It doesn't sound right at all, and I bet it isn't on your list." "Why not?" "Because it concerned a young child," he said. "It was a real tragedy. The poor little chap drowned in a barrel." "Oh, no." Violet closed her eyes. How awful. The poor parents. According to the account, he went missing. When the searchers had exhausted all other avenues, one of the constables opened the lid of a barrel, and there he was. "He must have fallen in."
And lowered the lid at the same time? He couldn't have.
Did they treat it as murder?
No. The coroner assumed that he had fallen in and that later on, when the light was failing, someone must have inadvertently placed the lid on the barrel.
That sounds silly.
I agree. But that is what the report says.
Then I'll make a note, and we had better keep looking.
2 hours later, Lawrence pushed his binder into the middle of the desk. "That's it," he said. "I can't see straight and I've got the devil of a headache. Have we got enough to be going on with?"
Violet scanned her journal. More than enough. We found reports for about half the names I listed. Those, together with the other records, gives well over 20 inexplicable deaths. Lawrence took the list from her.
"They're not in order," he said. "Wait a moment."
He opened his notebook and relisted them, putting a tick against each of Violet's entries as he wrote it down.
Right. The first name on the list is Solomon Darby, who fell in front of a cart in March 1876. Next is Mary Green, who drowned in December of that year, and Mary Clark, who fell down the stairs in January of 77. Charlie Green was found dead in his bed in May 77.
Any relation to Mary?
Her 8-year-old son. The verdict on his death was unknown. The boy was perfectly healthy when he retired to bed. The father went to get him up in the morning and he was cold and stiff. A drop of blood in the right nostril was the only unusual sign.
There are too many children on this list. I don't like it.
Next is Althea Carter, and then Fanny Nunn. Strange.
What?
The next inexplicable death after Fanny is Charlie Adams in 1880, nearly a 3-year gap. But since then, there have been at least 1 and often 2 deaths a year. Extraordinary.
My goodness. Violet's hand flew to her mouth. How dreadful. Don't you see what this means?
Lawrence nodded. Oh, yes. There's a definite pattern. The murders started before the death of Fanny Nunn, and they have continued unabated ever since. Chapter 34. The Ironmongers.
I can't believe it,
said Violet for the 3rd time as she worried at her bandages with pale fingers. Stop that, said Lawrence, placing his hand over hers. They will unravel and you'll need to see the doctor again.
It's just so horrible, she continued. Could we have made a mistake?
Nothing is certain, said Lawrence. Our evidence is largely circumstantial, but we know that somebody killed Moyes, and his murderer is probably still living in Dis. Even if only one of the deaths is unnatural, it is one too many.
And we don't know who did it or why. Do you think anyone suspects that we are investigating?
They must do. Someone lured you into that empty house with the sole purpose of causing you harm.
But how could they know?
Have you told anyone why you are here?
Only Michael. Mary Nunn thinks I'm a journalist. At least that's the story I gave her, and I think she believed me. But anyone could have heard you and me talking, or perhaps listened to one of my conversations with Michael.
We can't trust anyone, said Lawrence, lowering his voice.
What do we do?
Lawrence walked towards the window and stared at the whitewashed wall beyond. We need to know why Fanny Nunn was so important. She was the only person named in the confession. Why don't we look at the newspaper report of her death while we are here? Her mother gave me lots of useful information, but there may be something more in the papers. Lawrence scanned the bookshelves and removed the volume covering December 1877. He drew his chair to the other side of the desk and sat next to Violet. Fanny's death had been the subject of several reports, and he located them quickly. They read the articles side by side, their heads bent close together. I'm not sure this helps, said Lawrence when they had finished. There's a dearth of available witnesses.
Yes. Both the surgeons are dead, said Violet. I found that out several days ago. Fanny's brother Christopher lives in London, and we can't speak to him. John Aldrich died last year, according to Minnie, and Harry Aldrich won't talk to anybody about Fanny.
What about his sisters? Asked Lawrence. Both of them were witnesses, and the newspaper report suggests that the coroner took their evidence seriously.
Violet scanned the paper again. I agree. They both heard Fanny drown. Do you think we should go and see them?
If they haven't gone to meet their maker. Everyone else involved seems to have passed away.
Violet smiled. But they were well past their prime. There's nothing sinister about their deaths, and yes, the Aldrich girls are very much alive. They'd been running the ironmongers in Market Hill since their father died. We could go there now.
Good, I think we should. And let's hope they're a little more forthcoming than their brother. The Misses Aldrich were a long way past their prime, which momentarily confused Violet, who still had the 1877 newspaper reports fresh in her mind. She'd overlooked the fact that almost 2 decades had passed and they were no longer young women. From the moment Lawrence opened the door to the ironmongers and ushered her through, Violet was ill at ease. She reached the counter first and asked the middle-aged woman behind it where she might find Miss Louisa Aldrich. When the woman replied that she was Louisa, Violet could not conceal her surprise. Louisa Aldrich wore a smart black brocade dress. Though the modest dress looked simple, it was finely tailored and of excellent quality. Louisa was taller than Violet and looked older. It was difficult to estimate her age, but fine crow's feet and raised veins on the back of her hands gave clues to the passage of time. Slim, with pale, unblemished skin, Louisa wore her hair in a tight bun exposing a long, slender neck. Her deportment was elegant, and she carried herself with the confident poise of a woman who knows her place in the world. The well-organized ironmongers in which Louisa kept shop smelled like the blacksmiths in Violet's childhood village. Items of metalwork hung from hooks on the ceiling with smaller pieces arranged in drawers or tidy stacks. Violet felt a wave of nostalgia, half expecting a horse to push its head through the stable door at the rear.
"How may I help?" asked Louisa.
"A pair of hinges and nails to fit," said Lawrence, pointing to a half-open drawer containing a small and, hopefully cheap, set of brass fittings.
Louisa retrieved them and deftly wrapped the items in a piece of newspaper which Lawrence recognized as last week's copy of the Dis Express. "Will that be all? And some information, please," Violet added. "Certainly. What would you like to know? I'll fetch Mr. Baxter if you need something forged." "It's not that sort of information," said Violet. "Nothing to do with the shop." "Oh?" Louisa's brow knitted momentarily. "I hoped you would answer some questions about Fanny Nunn." "Why? The poor girl died a long time ago." Violet caught Lawrence's eye and hoped he would follow her lead. Her persona as a reporter had worked well with Mary Nunn, and she thought it worth repeating. "I'm working for a magazine," she said. "I don't believe you," said Louisa directly. Violet opened her mouth to protest, but the words would not come. Something close to a smile played across Lawrence's lips. Violet scowled at him, furious at his enjoyment of her discomfort. "I saw Mary Nunn yesterday," said Louisa. "She has told half the town that she will be receiving an award from your magazine." "That's not what I said," Violet protested. "It's the way she has interpreted your words," said Louisa. "Take whatever you said and multiply it by a large dose of wishful thinking. The result will be Mary Nunn's version of events." "Isn't she reliable?" asked Violet. "To a certain degree," said Louisa. "She does not lie so much as exaggerate the truth." "Then what she feels about her daughter's death is not necessarily what happened." "It might be. But equally Mary could have embellished things. She is a good woman, but prone to overstating the situation."
"And she is singularly indiscreet," said Lawrence.
"Yes, I asked Mary not to say anything about the award."
Violet was intentionally curt, hoping that her faux outrage would distract Louisa from further questions. She did not want her to guess their real purpose. In the event, it did not matter.
"Well, now we've got that out of the way, what do you want to know?" "I won't ask why you are inquiring. Be as nosy as you like. My brother has already spoken about you, Miss Smith, and a friend of his is a friend of mine." "Thank you."
Violet smiled weakly. She had feared a hostile reception from Louisa.
"You already know that I've spoken to Fanny's mother.
She mentioned you briefly, but I didn't realise your close involvement until I read it in the newspaper." "Yes, it was an unsettling experience," said Louisa, "and one that I shared with my sister. We were home together that night, but Alice heard the cries first. Perhaps it's best if I fetch her." Louisa unlatched the stable door and disappeared out of sight.
"Well recovered?" said Lawrence, grinning. Violet shook her head.
"You enjoyed that, didn't you?"
"I don't think I've ever seen you lost for words."
"I have some choice words for you," she hissed as the door reopened. "This is Alice," said Louisa Aldrich, presenting an identically clad and similar-looking woman, also in her late 40s. It was only Alice's slighter stature and a large silver cross that she wore on a chain that differentiated one sister from another. "Alice has agreed to tell you everything she heard. Please take a seat."
Violet murmured her thanks and moved towards a small table tucked away in the back corner of the store. The three women sat down on the only 3 seats available, and Lawrence loitered by the counter feeling awkward. Louisa was about to speak when the door opened and an elderly man hunched painfully over a walking stick hobbled into the shop. He approached Lawrence and looked him up and down.
"New boy, are you?"
he asked. Lawrence forced a smile as Louisa Aldrich glided towards the counter.
"Mr. Seeley, how are you today?"
"Middling," he said. "My poor old bones are playing up."
"I'm sorry to hear that. What can I do for you?"
"You sent this,"
he said accusingly, producing a crumpled piece of paper.
"It says I owe £15.
"That is correct."
"I don't have £15.
"You do surprise me," said Louisa with the air of a woman facing a regular problem.
"So I can't pay you."
The man propped his stick against the counter and crossed his arms.
"Can you pay any of it?"
"I might manage £5 at a push,"
he said, pursing his lips.
"Then give me £5 today and another £5 for the next 2 months."
"That's more like it,"
he said, reaching into his pocket.
"Fancy sending me a bill for the whole amount. I don't know what your father would say."
"I've written it in the book,"
said Louisa, ignoring the slight. "Look, £5 paid, £10 due. I'll see you again next month." The old man grunted and retreated towards the doorway.
"Let's try again," said Louisa, taking a seat. "My sister says you've been asking about Fanny Nunn," said Alice. Her voice was quiet with a distinctive lisp. "Yes," said Violet. "It would be helpful if you could tell us everything you remember about Fanny." Alice gazed into her lap. She seemed less confident than her sister and struggled to make eye contact. "I remember a great deal," she said. "It is not the sort of night easily forgotten. It was late, getting on for midnight, I think, when Harry called me to the window and asked if I could hear noises. I opened the latch and listened." She paused and transferred her glance from her lap to the window pane. "Go on," said Violet. Alice blinked and continued, still staring into the distance. "I distinctly heard a cry," she said. "A female voice was wailing in distress." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Don't,' and she said it several times. The words were unmistakable." "What did you do?" Violet leaned forward and looked into Alice's eyes. She did not return her gaze. "I went to Louisa's room to seek her opinion." "Yes," said Louisa. "So I opened my window and heard the same shrill cries. 'Oh, don't! Save me! Help me!' the voice moaned. And then there was a dreadful silence followed by a long shriek." Violet shuddered. "How awful!" "It was," said Alice, turning to her sister. Louisa reached for her hand and squeezed it. "It affected us all in different ways. Harry will not speak of it at all, and Alice still has nightmares even after all these years." "Did you hear anything else?" "Yes, gurgling sounds which were coming from the direction of the mere near Park Fields. I heard this immediately after the cries." "Many believe that Fanny took her own life," said Violet. Alice shook her head vigorously. "She did not." "Are you certain?" "Positive.
The cries were quite distinctive. Fanny was screaming for her life.
Did you hear anyone else?
No, only Fanny's voice.
What happened next? Lawrence spoke from his vantage point midway along the counter. Both sisters jumped at the sound of his voice.
My father and brother went to look for her,
said Louisa. They thought she must be in the area of the mere near Mr. Muskett's garden.
They met a police constable in the street, and he joined them in their search. They followed the sounds until, by the light of their lanterns, they saw a young girl struggling in the water. She was about 20 feet from the bank. By then she was no longer crying, and all they could hear were a series of groans. They called out to her, but she did not reply.
Did they try to save her?
Of course.
Louisa's voice rose in indignation.
There were 2 boats moored nearby. My father and brother attempted to push off, trying first one boat, then the other. But both boats were in a state of disrepair and utterly useless. My father called to a passer-by to fetch a length of rope. By the time it arrived, it was already too late, and the poor girl had disappeared into the water. There was no moon that night. It was pitch black and too cold to make any further progress. So they abandoned the search until dawn.
Poor Fanny. Violet sighed as she imagined the terror of the drowning girl.
Next day,
Louisa continued,
they dragged the mere and recovered Fanny's body.
You know the rest. The sisters fell silent. Violet tried to find something comforting to say, but nothing came to mind.
Thank you for your help,
she said finally. We understand better now.
Do you?
Said Alice. She met Violet's eyes for the first time.
I think so,
said Violet slowly.
There's something I haven't told you yet. I don't believe I mentioned it to you, Louisa. It didn't seem important at the time. Fanny was in the shop on the day she died. I happened to be there with my father when she came in looking for straps for her suitcase. She was in good spirits and told me that she was going away to Norwich but would be back the following week.
Curious, said Violet. I have heard that she was in low spirits and upset.
Alice cocked her head. Not upset. Nervous would be a better description. She didn't express any concern or upset about the journey she was about to undertake. Her only reservation was a meeting later that day.
Meeting? Louisa appeared surprised by her sister's statement.
Yes. Fanny had arranged to meet someone before leaving for Norwich and anticipated a difficult conversation. You didn't mention this at the inquest, didn't I? I haven't thought about it for nearly 20 years. I can't remember if I said anything at the time or not. I don't suppose it's of any importance.
Lawrence and Violet exchanged glances. It could be, if Fanny was murdered, he said.
But the meeting could have been with a friend, protested Alice. The comment about the meeting didn't sound sinister, and the fact that she purchased the straps for her case has more relevance. It proves that she intended to leave Dith.
Your recollections have been most interesting. Thank you again, said Violet, rising from her chair. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate your time. They emerged from the ironmongery and into Market Hill. That changes things, said Lawrence. Violet nodded. Possibly. But she could have been referring to a meeting with her sweetheart, Alfred. I thought you said she spent the evening with him. She did. Then it wasn't that. We need to find out who else Fanny met that night, and why she was so nervous. Chapter 35. The Cupboard. Didn't you like it? Asked Lawrence as Violet pushed her dinner plate away, almost untouched. I liked it well enough, said Violet, but I've lost my appetite recently. Hardly surprising with all the worry. Haven't I apologized enough? Lawrence gave a half smile as he leaned across the table and looked into Violet's eyes. I shouldn't have left you on your own. I don't know what I would have done if your injuries had been any worse. It won't happen again. I wasn't asking for another apology, said Violet. There is no need.
Can we forget all about it and please stop monitoring how much I eat? It's annoying.
Shall we retire to the lounge?
We may as well.
Violet was still angry. Her relief at having Lawrence safely back was waning, and his insistence at clucking around her like an old hen was taking its toll. They walked into the front room of the Crown. There was nobody around, and they took their choice of seating to the side of the fireplace. Violet sat by the window, and Lawrence drew up a chair to face her. "Where is everybody?" asked Lawrence.
"In the market room, I suppose," said Violet. "There's enough noise coming from it." She stared distractedly towards the fireplace and sighed. "I want to go home," she said suddenly.
Lawrence raised his head in surprise. "But we haven't finished," he exclaimed.
"We may never finish. This investigation lurches on and on. I want to sleep in my own bed for once."
"We shouldn't be here much longer."
"How do you know?" "Do you think that a confession will magically materialize in front of you? It's not going to happen, Lawrence." He opened his mouth, but she continued in full flow. "It's not been the same for you, swanning off to Liverpool for days on end. You've left me here alone, feeling ill much of the time, and to what purpose?"
Violet looked as if she was about to cry. Lawrence took her hand. "Come on, old thing. It's not like you to complain."
She flashed him a withering look. "I want to go back to Bury. You stay here if you must."
"Very well, if that's what you want." She nodded her head. "Then I'll take you to the station tomorrow, but let's talk about what we have learned while we are still together. Give me the benefit of your wisdom so I can manage without you." Lawrence was downcast as he spoke.
"Where shall I start?"
"With your opinion on the whole affair."
She nodded. "There is some evidence of a crime," she said. "For once, it's worth investigating. Somebody pushed Fanny into the water, and her depressed behavior leading up to her death caused doubt over the guilty verdict. Some think she was suicidal, but the evidence suggests otherwise."
"I agree," said Lawrence.
"And Alice Aldrich thinks that she was meeting someone. I spoke to Alfred Wiley, and he did not mention a meeting, neither did Mary Nunn, but she told me that Fanny was loitering as if she was waiting for something."
"Interesting."
"And Alfred said that Fanny told him she would be leaving £30 in the pocket of her ulster under the willow."
"Which wasn't there."
The arrival of a large group of young men carrying tankards interrupted their musings. The men weaved towards the other window seat, too close for comfort. Lawrence raised his eyes and grimaced.
"Great," he said, just when we were making progress.
"Oi, Barney!"
One of the men stood and held up his half-empty tankard. He waved it in the direction of a man coming through the doorway. The other man waved a hand towards him and retreated.
"You were saying?" continued Lawrence.
"I said the money wasn't there."
Violet lowered her voice as she moved closer to Lawrence. "Do you think she intended to leave it?"
"She had nothing to give him, unless—" Violet put a hand to her mouth. "Oh."
She turned away, distracted as a roar came from the group of men. They'd clinked glasses together and were starting to sing. "We're leaving," said Lawrence. "Come on."
"Wait. I've had a thought. What if Fanny had a means of getting money, but it was risky?"
"I don't understand." Lawrence moved from the table and sat next to Violet.
"She could have met someone with the expectation of procuring money."
"You mean blackmail?"
"Yes."
That would explain why she was nervous. The singing petered out as Minnie Panks bustled into the room.
"Keep it down," she snapped. "Go in the market room if you want to behave like that."
She glanced sympathetically towards Violet.
"Get me another min,"
said a hang-toothed, wiry man. "I'll serve you in the market room."
"Oh, go on." "Don't do it," said another man. "Ratty has nothing left except his burial club money, and his missus will do for him if he spends that."
They all laughed.
"That's it," exclaimed Lawrence, grabbing Violet by the hand. He pulled her into the hallway and peered into the dining room. It was empty.
"This way."
They sat down at a table in the corner.
"What do you know about burial clubs?"
"Only that they are the salvation of the poor.
2 young children died last week and their parents were only able to give them a decent funeral because of the Oddfellow's money. Edward Bowden paid burial dues, said Lawrence. And Mary Nunn. What are you suggesting? Lawrence thought for a moment. Only that it's very convenient. But it's not a large amount of money. Only enough to cover funeral costs, with a little over. A little over could mean a lot in a poor household, and even more if there was an insurance policy. Really? Violet seemed doubtful. Don't you remember the Liverpool scandal? Perhaps not. You were in the wrong part of the country. It was all my uncle spoke of for weeks. A chap called Higgins died. His mother-in-law poisoned him and collected something in the region of £100 in burial club payments. That's a lot of money. And worth a £30 bribe if someone found out. You mean Fanny? Lawrence nodded. You don't think the Oddfellows are involved? Not directly. But we might be able to find out who benefited from the payments by checking their records. They won't agree to that. I know. And I wouldn't ask them. Where do the Oddfellows keep their paraphernalia? Here, of course. That's one of the reasons they meet at the Crown. They have no premises of their own. There's a large cupboard out the back where they store banners, regalia, and the like. I suppose they might keep documents too. Good, said Lawrence, stroking his chin. Well, there's only one way to find out. There was a stark contrast between the Crown in the evening and during the early hours of the morning. The busy public house had quietened into a silent, creaking menace, ready to waken any of the occupants with the slightest misstep. Lawrence inwardly cursed for the 3rd time as he tiptoed down the passageway to the groan of floorboards. He passed Violet's room, hoping that she had followed his request to get some sleep, ignoring the temptation to check. As he reached the top of the stairs, he glanced towards the landing windows. They were both open, and the curtains billowed in the light breeze. Lawrence covered the stump of his candle, which he'd concealed in a tin top to protect it from draughts. He could ill afford to lose his only source of illumination. Every tread of the stairs produced another moan from the ancient wood until Lawrence finally reached the bottom. Holding his makeshift lamp aloft, he surveyed the area to the right by the reception area. Light glinted off the gun cabinet opposite the wooden counter housing the room keys. Lawrence edged through the small gap in the counter facing a wall containing several rows of hooks. Bunches of keys were hanging there, each affixed to rough-hewn wooden tags etched with room numbers. The end hooks held 2 chunky keys, probably for the external doors, and the other, a bunch of varying-sized keys of indeterminate purpose. Lawrence grabbed the latter and made for the rear of the building. Moonlight illuminated the sizable rear room, revealing a double-doored recess with twin brass fingerplates and a lock set below. Lawrence crept past the room and almost tripped over the Pank's elderly cat, which lay prone on the rug by the fireplace. Its yowl pierced the silence, and Lawrence grimaced as it stared balefully towards him, hackles raised and spitting in fury. He waited with bated breath for the proprietor to descend, but silence reigned, and he continued in his task. Lawrence tried one key after another from the enormous bunch and was beginning to lose hope when a tarnished brass key turned in the lock. He opened the double doors and entered a storage cupboard large enough to be a separate room, but for the lack of natural light. The commodious closet could easily have held a double bed and furniture. Instead, it contained shelving stacked with various items of Oddfellows' equipment. The cupboard hid a treasure trove of regalia. Large banners leaned against the side wall, and items of apparel adorned the rear shelving. Lawrence set his paltry candle on a round table in the centre of the space. He advanced towards the shelves and picked up a black-rimmed apron from a shelf marked Mourning and examined it. The words Memento Finis lay between a depiction of the sun and stars. He shivered as the candlelight picked out crossed keys above a skull and returned the item to its place next to a set of black sashes. Lawrence checked the shelving and noted a dozen sets of ceramic mugs, beneath which were dusty tomes of records, coated in a thick layer of dust. They looked as if they had lain unused for years. Lawrence collected his light source and settled cross-legged beside the books. He pulled one out and tilted it towards the candle, squinting at the untidy handwriting. Inside was a register of Oddfellows members dated 1883 and of little use. He tried another and another, until he opened the fourth register, which turned out to be a ledger full of accounting records. Gritting his teeth, he turned the pages and peered at the entries. The writing was clear and easily readable. The Oddfellows' treasurer must have been methodical. Each page recorded the month and year of the starting transaction, and the book contained about 12 years' worth of records. The accounts were in two parts, the first being general expenses and the second a history of fund payments for burials and sickness. Lawrence scanned the pages. On first glance, everything seemed in order. There were instances of multiple payments to the same family member. That might have been suspicious, but it was a sad fact of life that death was commonplace, especially when caused by disease. The amounts involved were not vast, though they could have been tempting if money was in short supply. But all in all, there didn't seem anything untoward in the records. Lawrence sighed and returned to the front of the cash book, this time focusing on the description. The ruled columns recorded information about the deceased. They included their relationship to the claimant and a witness who was usually a doctor. Entries started in 1882 and the pages ran out in January 1894, at which point a new ledger began. Lawrence sighed. It was getting cold, and he was sitting on a stone floor. He manoeuvred himself into a squatting position and took a final look at the register. As he considered the attraction of returning to his warm bed, a record caught his eye. The entry bore the witness signature of a woman, notable because the majority of the others were by men. The woman's name was Amy Sullivan. Lawrence flicked through the pages a second time, searching for more records in her name. She featured on all the preceding pages, but entries petered out in 1891, with the last one early in 1892. Who was Amy Sullivan? And more importantly, where was she? Lawrence closed the book and returned it to the shelf, all the time wondering how old she was. The dates of her entries were significant for no other reason than her disappearance from the records in the early 1890s. Could Amy Sullivan be the woman they were seeking? As Lawrence stood, his numb legs buckled and he tripped into one of the banners. It fell to the floor with a clatter. The candle tipped over, splattering wax over the floor and across the spines of the registers. Not again. He sighed as the cupboard plunged into darkness. He waited alone in the unlit closet while his eyes grew accustomed to the dark. The outlines of the unfamiliar regalia took on monstrous proportions, and the metal jewels glinted like eyes. A headless mannequin wearing a Grand Master sash seemed to have moved ever so slightly from its original place. Lawrence gulped. His imagination was running wild. He would rather risk explaining himself than spend another moment where he was. He pushed open the cupboard and scanned the room. It was empty, and even the cat had disappeared. Encouraged, he tiptoed into the rear lobby and then into the entrance hall. With a sigh of relief, he alighted the stairs before feeling ice-cold metal shoved against the nape of his neck. A low voice growled, "One move, and I'll shoot." Chapter 36. Seeking Amy. Sunday, May 26, 1895. Lawrence was rarely embarrassed and considered it a wasted emotion. Once a thing had happened, there was no reversing it and no point in worrying what people thought. But today was an exception. He had crept into the dining room behind Violet and sat in the furthest corner in a futile attempt to avoid bumping into George Panks, "What's wrong?" Violet had asked, and Lawrence shrugged as if it was unimportant. "You seem like a cat on hot coals," she continued. "Anyway, how did you get on last night?" "I found out something interesting," he said, neglecting to mention his encounter with their host in the early hours of the morning. Lawrence could still feel the cold barrel of the shotgun in the nape of his neck. He squirmed at the thought of the awkward moment when he'd had to explain why he was prowling downstairs with a large bunch of keys in his hand. Unable to think of anything more convincing, he had told George Panks that he was hungry and looking for something to eat. Panks had lowered his gun and, in deeply sarcastic tones, had offered to fetch him some pie. Lawrence had no choice but to accept, and suffered the further humiliation of George Panks serving him at a table in the dining room. His host sat opposite and watched silently across the table until he had finished every last crumb. "I found a candidate for the Skoll Confessor," he said quickly. "Have you?" "I think so. Her name frequently appears as a witness to the funeral payments." "Who is she, and what makes you think she might be the writer?" "Amy Sullivan. I'm only speculating about her involvement, but the entries she witnessed stopped suddenly, and I wondered if she died." "Or left the parish," said Violet. "It's worth a look," Lawrence protested. Violet agreed and returned to her room to collect the notebook in which she had written a list of burials at St. Mary's. "It's no good," she said, closing the notebook. "She isn't here. I didn't think she would be. I would have remembered a name like that." "We can look elsewhere." "Don't forget that I'm leaving today," Lawrence sighed. "I hoped you'd have a change of heart." "Well, I haven't." "Why don't we try the Skoll Parish records?" "If you insist," said Violet. "But it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. We don't even know that she's dead." "I've got a strong feeling about this," said Lawrence as they left the hotel and took the Skoll Road. "You always say that when you want me to do something that's against my better judgment," Violet complained. They arrived at Skoll Church, to the peal of bells as the congregation departed from the Sunday morning service. "Good timing," muttered Lawrence. "We should have made an effort to get here earlier. I haven't been to church for weeks." "You don't go every Sunday in Bury." "And you only go on high days and holidays." The arrival of the vicar interrupted their bickering, and he greeted them like old friends. "Ah, there you are," he said. "Oh, come in, come in." They exchanged puzzled glances and followed him into the porch. "Which one of you is Molly?" said the vicar jovially. "Only joking," he continued, watching Lawrence's stern expression. "Neither one of us," said Violet. "Oh, you're not here to talk about marriage?" "No. We're here to see your burial records." "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were Mrs. Davenport's niece. Forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," said Violet pleasantly. "But may we see your parish register?" "Certainly," said the vicar. "Are you looking for anyone in particular?" "Yes," said Lawrence. "Amy Sullivan." "Oh, yes. Poor Amy. Death came quickly in the end." "You knew her?" "For many years. Amy's family came from Ireland and settled here while she was still a young child." "She died young?" "No, Amy must have been 50 or more. She lies in the churchyard now and has been there for at least 3 years." "How did she die?" asked Violet. "She died of cancer," said the vicar. "But she did not suffer for long." "How sad for her family." "You didn't know them, then?" "Not at all." "Oh, quite, or you would have known that all of Amy's family predeceased her, mother and father, as you would expect. But she was the last of her siblings. Even her niece died young, poor little mite." "She must have been lonely," said Violet. The vicar smiled. "Anything but," he said. "She was a nurse, and before that, a midwife. There was a good turnout for her funeral, though I expect Polly was responsible for that." "Polly?" Lawrence spoke for the first time, having been content up to then for Violet to take control. "Polly Grundy, her best friend. They were thick as thieves at school and stayed close all their lives. Speak to Polly if you want to know more about her." "Where does she live?" "Ivy Cottage. Come." He beckoned them from the church and strode in the direction of the Norwich Road. "There," he said, pointing to a small cottage in the distance. "You should find her at home. She only left church half an hour ago." Lawrence and Violet approached Ivy Cottage to see a stout woman clad in a brown dress with her face and hands hidden from view. One gloved arm held a woven skep, and the other grasped a smoker into which she was blowing assiduously. Bees buzzed lazily from an open hive as she peered inside. Lawrence leaned over the stone wall and coughed. She carried on, oblivious to his presence, and he tried again, this time with more success. She walked towards him, lowering her veiled hat. "Yes?" she asked, cocking her head in a gesture of mild curiosity.
"We've come about Amy Sullivan," said Violet.
"Amy Sullivan," Polly echoed. "I haven't heard her name in a few years. What's she to you?"
"A cousin of my mother's,"
said Violet without batting an eyelid. Her conscience had become less troublesome over the years, and she was fast becoming an accomplished liar. "Who was your mother?"
"Bridie Smith."
Another lie dripped from her lips without a moment's delay. "She never mentioned her," said Polly suspiciously.
"My mother's Irish,"
Violet replied. "Of course," said Polly. "Amy went back to Cork a few times. I never heard her mention a Smith."
"That's my mother's married name."
"Well, that explains it," said Polly, evidently satisfied. "You know that she died, don't you?"
Violet shook her head sadly. "I know now," she said, "but not when I set off. My mother is frail, and when I told her I was visiting Dis, she asked me to call in and pay my respects on her behalf."
"You will be returning with sad news, then," said Polly. "I wish it wasn't so. She was a good friend, and I still miss her."
"Can you tell me anything about her? Mother hasn't seen her for over a decade. It will make the loss more bearable if she knows a little of how she fared."
"Of course, my dear," said Polly. "Why don't you come inside and I'll make a pot of tea?" They followed Polly up the path to the front door of her stone cottage, and Lawrence stooped as they entered the small porch. The cottage stood in stark contrast to the pretty, sunlit gardens. It was cold, dark, and even smaller than it seemed on the outside. Polly opened the door into her tiny parlour and gestured to a pair of wooden chairs. "Sit there, my dears, and I'll fetch your drinks through." They sat in silence and admired the bucolic view beyond the garden, wishing Polly had chosen to talk outside. The door creaked, and Polly appeared bearing a wooden tray with 3 chipped cups and a pair of saucers. She stirred the tea, set the cups out, and waited for it to brew. "What do you want to know?" she asked, a smile flickering across her weather-beaten face. Violet tried to guess her age. She'd likely be close in age to Amy, and therefore in her early 50s. But if her appearance was anything to go by, she'd had a hard life. Her eyebrows were grey and sparse, and tiny hairs protruded from her chin. Deep grooves furrowed her brow, and the tendrils of hair beneath her white cap bore only a trace of chestnut brown. A patchwork of age spots covered her gnarled hands, and her knuckles looked red and painful.
"Tell me anything," said Violet. "Anything about her recent life."
"First and foremost, she was a nurse," said Polly. "Caring was in her nature, and looking after people was all she wanted to do. She put their needs before her own and was kindness itself, especially at life's end. She had a particular horror of dying alone, and would be there to hold a hand or provide comfort to those approaching their final hours."
"Did she ever marry?"
"Goodness, no." "She might have, had she not been so cynical about men. An unrequited love early on, you see. It put her off for the rest of her life."
"Who was he?"
"Oh, I don't know," said Polly. "She would not say, and although I often asked, she refused to tell me. It was a source of shame to her because he did not love her back. Well, not enough to make an honest woman of her." "Perhaps he couldn't marry," said Lawrence, incautiously, "if he already had a wife." Polly raised an eyebrow. "I don't think that is likely," she said, lifting the lid of the teapot.
"How long did this infatuation last?"
"Decades, for all I know." Polly picked up the teapot and poured. She pushed the cups with saucers towards her guests and took the one without. "He must have liked her somewhat," she continued. "She owned nice things that she could not have bought from a nurse's pay." "Does Amy have any living relatives?" asked Violet. Polly shook her head. "She was the last of the Sullivan line. There's nobody except your mother and perhaps a few distant kin in Ireland." "That's a pity. I would have liked to have met Amy's family and asked for a memento for my mother. A likeness or a letter would mean a lot to her."
"I can help with that," said Polly.
"You have a picture of Amy?"
"I might have. When Amy died, her furniture went to Aldrich's auction house, but she left me a box of personal items, nothing expensive and only of sentimental value, but you are welcome to see them and choose something for your mother."
Violet felt a momentary pang of guilt at her kindness, but it was too good an opportunity to waste. "Yes, please," she said, "and thank you so much."
"Come this way."
Polly guided them up a narrow flight of stairs to an even darker landing with a door on the right and 2 uneven steps up to another door in front.
"Mind your head," she said as they trod on the spongy floorboards. "I won't come in. It's more of a box room than a bedroom, and it won't fit us all. I'll be downstairs if you need me."
Lawrence squeezed into the room behind Violet and stood at the doorway with his head bowed. "Calling it a box room is a gross exaggeration," he complained. "I'll stay here, otherwise I'll get in your way." Violet reached for the wooden crate, which was the only box-shaped item in the room and presumably the one to which Polly Grundy had been referring. She blew a thick layer of dust from the top and sent the choking particles into the damp air of the room. Lawrence sneezed and retrieved a handkerchief from his pocket. Polly's description had been accurate. The box contained trinkets of no discernible value. Amy seemed to have a penchant for carved wooden animals. A small collection of elephants, a tapir and a rhinoceros were gathering dust in a chipped glass fruit bowl. Violet removed them together with a beveled hand mirror and placed them on the floorboards. An ugly vase, a brass ring and a hair comb soon joined them. Violet continued removing objects until the box was almost empty. Then she noticed something underneath a leather-bound notebook. Violet pulled the shiny object out and held it aloft. At first glance, it looked like a medallion, but when she took a closer look, it was an Oddfellows jewel. Lawrence whistled. Where did she get that from? He reached for the medallion and examined the back for identifying marks. There were none. Violet, in the meantime, had opened the notebook. She passed it to Lawrence without speaking. He licked his fingers and turned the pages. "Accounts," he said unnecessarily. "Records of money collected with dates by all the entries." "Her wages, perhaps?" asked Violet. "Or something more sinister. Hello, what's this?" He extracted a piece of folded paper from the back of the notebook. "A letter from an admirer," he said. "Listen to this. My dearest Amy, you are the cleverest girl. Brains and beauty personified. I will act at once upon your suggestion. The mere again, or is it too soon? Either way, there will be a bit for you and a bit for me, as always." "No doubting it now," said Lawrence. Amy was right in the thick of this business. The only question remaining is who was there with her. Chapter 37. Cat Among the Pigeons. Lawrence and Violet walked towards Dis, both preoccupied with the exact nature of the crimes involving Amy Sullivan. She'd been colluding with somebody, probably male, and they'd conspired to obtain burial money for profit. "But," said Lawrence, stopping to emphasize his point, "it's not a great deal of money. The largest amount in the book was £100. If Amy and the other party had shared the proceeds, after factoring in a funeral payment, there would be barely any money left. A lot of risk for little benefit." "I know," said Violet. "I am not happy with the logic behind our theory. There must be something else that we are missing." "And someone else," said Lawrence. Violet shuddered. "It makes my skin crawl," she said, "to think that it could be somebody we know. And we still have to determine what we are dealing with. We don't know how many deaths were natural and how many were criminal, or whether they were opportunistic or planned. And if the latter, then it's cold-blooded murder for sure. Anyway, Violet, We must hurry along now. You have a train to catch.
I thought you didn't want me to go.
I will be a lot happier when you have left. Violet fell quiet, and they walked in silence as Lawrence considered his previous remark. That is to say, I won't have to worry about your safety when you are away from this snake pit, he said hurriedly.
I know what you meant, she said. My feelings weren't hurt, I was just thinking.
About what?
About what we ought to do next. There isn't enough evidence to bring the matter to the attention of the police force. I expect they would laugh at us.
My thoughts exactly, said Lawrence. The time for subtlety is over. I'm going to set the cat among the pigeons.
How?
By making our suspicions public.
And where are you going to do that?
I'm not sure yet, he admitted, but it's one of the reasons why I would like you well out of the way. They had walked briskly and taken a more direct route leading past the railway station.
It's a pity we didn't think to send your bag on, said Lawrence over the rattle of a passing train. He watched the brightly painted engine chug into the distance, steam billowing from its funnel. His heart sank at the thought of Violet leaving, but he knew it was for the best.
We should talk about suspects, said Violet.
Have you any thoughts?
Not really, said Lawrence. It's reasonable to suppose the involvement of the Oddfellows, but it may not be direct. I'm not suggesting it was one of them, but at the least they must know the perpetrator. This person is probably a male, but not a young man. He would have to be in his 40s, but more likely in his 50s, if he was an admirer of Amy Sullivan.
We should have hung on to that note, said Lawrence. Someone may have recognized the handwriting.
Not after almost 20 years, said Violet.
And the writing was terrible, but the fact that it exists at all rules out the illiterate. And the crime itself involves a low cunning, more likely found in someone with a good education, said Lawrence.
Let's assume that it was an Oddfellow, said Violet. There was a jewel in Amy's possessions which could connect to the note. Now, the Oddfellows meet at the Crown every Sunday.
This evening?
Yes, every Sunday evening. So why not make a public declaration there? Even if the Oddfellows are not involved, there will be enough of them to hear and repeat what you have to say. It will be around the whole town by tomorrow.
Good.
Yes, that could work well.
In that case, let's go back to the Crown and pack your bag, Lawrence said, looking at his pocket watch. You can be in Bury by 5 o'clock.
Or Overstrand, said Violet.
Why on earth would you go back to Overstrand?
Because I've had a fascinating thought.
Go on.
You didn't find the skull confession in Redhill Street, did you?
No.
And neither did William Miller.
You know he didn't. Where is this leading?
You didn't find it because it wasn't there. It had already gone by then.
Gone where?
It could have gone anywhere, but I am hoping against hope that it went to Overstrand.
You mean that it was in Edward Bowden's Bible? I didn't see it.
Did you open every page?
No, but it was in my possession for the best part of a day. I think I would have noticed.
Not necessarily.
And Bowden was fond of the Bible. If it had been there, he would have found it. They had reached the Crown by now, and Lawrence held the door open as Violet entered.
That's all true, said Violet, walking past the empty lounge and towards the stairs. But I still intend to check.
I thought you wanted to go home.
I do, desperately, she said, climbing the first stair. But I can't sit idly by while you place yourself in danger.
She clung to the newel post as she turned and spoke. Lawrence gazed up at her in admiration. She was plucky and spirited, and he had mistreated her. Never again. It's not worth it, he said. Go home, and I will return as soon as I have announced the presence of a murderer in their midst.
No.
She shook her head.
I will find somewhere to stay overnight and send you a telegram tomorrow. I will be back in Bury in no time. By then, your plan may have come to fruition.
Lawrence smiled. As you wish, he said, before following her upstairs to help with her packing. Neither one of them heard the rustle of a newspaper coming from the lounge, which had not been as empty as it first appeared. The sole occupant of the room glowered and lowered a copy of the Dis Express. Once again, their luck had held. Once again, there was a problem, but a resolvable one. They folded the newspaper, rose, and walked towards the chemist on Market Hill. Lawrence tapped his fingers across an empty table in the lounge and stared across the hallway for signs of life. He'd adopted a strategic position near the door, taking advantage of the view into the market room where the evening's gathering would take place. Lawrence had checked the meeting arrangements with Minnie Panks earlier, and she'd dispensed the information without asking any questions. Violet had been right. Minnie lacked natural curiosity in the same way that Lawrence lacked patience. The wait for 7 o'clock seemed interminable, and Lawrence glanced at his watch. It was approaching 10 minutes to the hour. He might have reasonably expected some signs of life by now, but he was still the only person downstairs. Lawrence began to wonder if there had been a cancellation. His eyes grew heavy and unfocused as he waited. Boredom set in, and he leaned on the table with his chin propped up on his hand, trying to remain alert. Then, without warning, the front door swung open, and a group of men milled towards the market room, their voices gruff and low. Lawrence recognized some of the men from previous evenings at the Crown. Their faces were solemn and bore none of the jollity of the crowd of young men from the previous night. They filed into the market room and sat upon the wooden chairs, waiting in virtual silence for the meeting to begin. Lawrence remained seated, hoping that they would not shut the door, but after the last man entered, it swung back, muffling the sound of the speakers. He got to his feet and picked up a discarded newspaper which he pretended to read while loitering in the hall. When the coast was clear, he pushed the door open an extra inch, creating a partial view of the room without revealing his position. Lawrence leaned nonchalantly against the wall in case anyone else arrived and wondered what he was doing. After a few moments, Harry Aldrich made his way to the front of the room and coughed. He was wearing a black sash and a similar black-edged apron to the one Lawrence had seen in the cupboard the previous night. Aldrich made a sign that Lawrence didn't understand and gestured for quiet before pulling a piece of paper from his apron pocket. "Bow your heads for Robert Moore," he said. "Brothers, will you join me in recognizing the dedicated and zealous service of our friend Robert Moore, a dear friend cut down in his prime in a wanton act of murder? Brother Moore rendered valuable assistance with fundraising in his capacity as Deputy Treasurer. He has been a loyal and faithful member of this lodge, and is held by his brethren in high esteem. We, his friends, lament his loss." "Amen." A murmured "Amen" followed from the seated men. Harry Aldrich continued. "It is our sad duty to assign his position to another, and in these circumstances we may accept proposals outside of an annual general meeting. Yes, George." George Fairweather, who had been sitting ramrod straight, stood up. "I have a proposal," he growled. "Go on." "I propose we find the filthy cur who killed him and string them up in the marketplace." Harry sighed. "It's neither the time nor place to have this conversation," he said. "But what are they doing about it?" demanded another man at the back of the room. He rose to his feet to make the point and glared at his friend on the right-hand side, who reluctantly joined him. One by one, every man stood. Harry turned towards Arthur Thompson, who was sitting with Joseph Pope in the front row. "What's the latest news, Arthur?" he asked. Arthur Thompson joined Harry and faced the hostile crowd. "There was an examination of Brother Moore's body, as you know, and there will be an inquest here on Tuesday afternoon. There is no doubt that he drowned." "He didn't drown. Someone murdered him," said the man at the back. "As I was about to confirm before you interrupted," said Arthur. "Though there is room for doubt, both the surgeon and the coroner report bruises and cuts to Robert Moore's head. More specifically, there were finger marks to the side of his neck, marks that may have been caused if someone held his head beneath the water." There was a shocked silence, followed by a shuffle of chair legs as the men returned to their seats. Arthur continued. "Though Robert's death is common knowledge, I appreciate that the details are new, and I'm sorry to give such a graphic description of his final hours.
He did not deserve to die so horribly. He did not deserve to die at all. What are they doing to catch his killer? George Fairweather was still standing in the middle of the room, eyes blazing with fury. Harry and Arthur exchanged glances. The authorities are conducting a thorough investigation. They're doing the best they can. Which isn't much from what I've seen, muttered Joseph Pope. He was sitting, legs apart, hunched over his ample belly with a rare frown across his face. No, agreed Arthur. So far there has been little progress. I would have hoped for more.
Someone is going to get away with murder,
said George Fairweather, pulling off his sash. He hurled it to the floor.
I won't mourn him until they've caught his killer,
he snarled. Harry opened his mouth to speak, but Lawrence had already spotted what he suspected would be his best opportunity. He strode into the market room past the stony-faced men and towards a startled Harry Aldrich. Turning to face the group, Lawrence held up his hand for silence. Be careful what you wish for, he said dramatically. For the murderer of Robert Moore is a member of your organization.
No.
Joseph Pope eased himself from his chair.
That cannot be. We are good men, charitable and kind. You have seen the work we do.
Nevertheless, one of you is a killer, and he has killed more than once. There was an explosion of angry voices as the men protested their innocence.
Leave this meeting at once, said Harry Aldrich in a controlled voice, barely containing his fury. How dare you come in here and insult the memory of our friend?
I dare, because whoever killed Robert Moore also killed a young girl, and not just her, there have been others, the names of which you will learn in due course. And make no mistake, I will find this killer. Consider my words tonight. Think about what happened to your friend. Then look around this room and ask how well you know your neighbour. Where was he on the night that Robert Moore died? Cast your mind back 20 years. Could he have killed Fanny Nunn?
Fanny Nunn killed herself.
George Fairweather snapped out of the almost catatonic state into which he had fallen upon hearing Lawrence's words.
How do you know? Asked a man at the back. You didn't even live in Dis back then. Stop!
Harry Aldrich snapped, his anger in full flow.
Don't entertain this fantasy. We are brothers. Do not cast suspicion upon each other.
He turned to Lawrence. Do as I say, and leave.
Yes, get out.
The man at the back stood and made his way towards Lawrence, his friend trailing in his wake. I'm going, said Lawrence, lunging for the exit. He sidestepped the large man and grasped the door handle, then left, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He reached his room and sat on the edge of the bed, deep in thought. It had been a good night's work. He had undoubtedly lost some friends and a great deal of goodwill, but he had made an impact, and something was sure to come of it. 5 minutes later, he reached for his wallet and found it absent. He patted his jacket pocket and checked his coat, but to no avail. The wallet was missing. He wondered where it could be, and just as he began to panic, he remembered. The last place he'd used it was in the lounge. He'd been counting cash while killing time, waiting for the Oddfellows to arrive. The wallet must still be on the table. Lawrence crept downstairs, and as he reached the bottom step, a low murmur emanated from beyond the closed door of the market room. To Lawrence's relief, he saw the familiar shape of his wallet on the table and grabbed it, turning back towards the stairs. But directly in his eye-line was the portly form of Joseph Pope, hunched by the market room door and breathing laboriously. "Can I help?" asked Lawrence, hoping that Pope wasn't as antagonistic as the other Oddfellows. Joseph raised his head to reveal a florid face crowned by sweat-streaked hair. He uncurled himself and fanned his face with a chubby hand.
"Quite well, thank you," he muttered. "It's just a combination of this damnable business and a touch of indigestion. I felt quite faint for a moment."
"You should get some air," said Lawrence.
"Yes, I will."
Joseph shuffled towards the front door and stumbled over the tattered doormat. "I'll join you," said Lawrence, concerned. Pope's face was ashen, and he looked as if he was about to pass out.
A light breeze graced the April evening, and Joseph Pope raised his face towards the wind.
"Oh, that's better," he said.
"I'm sorry about your friend," said Lawrence, "and I'm even sorrier to be the bearer of bad news regarding his connection to the Oddfellows."
"Robert was a fine man," said Pope. "I have known him all my life. It's hard to believe he is gone. And when you said it might be one of us—"
"Was that the moment you felt unwell?"
"Yes, it was. The thought of it. Those men are my brothers."
"Including Harry Aldrich?"
"Of course. Why ever not?"
"No reason," said Lawrence, "except that he is in charge. Sometimes that distinction creates barriers to friendship."
"There are no barriers, I can assure you," said Pope. "We respect each other equally, and that applies regardless of our standing in the town."
"What do you mean?"
"Well, George is a blacksmith and works with his hands. I am a teller in the bank, and Harry owns a thriving auctioneering business. Yet we are all close friends."
"Is it true that Aldrich takes on house clearances?"
"Yes, a fair few."
"He must see some interesting things."
"I dare say, and some dull ones too. Some of the furniture is in such poor condition that it's only fit for firewood."
"And personal possessions?"
"He takes them too and sorts them into items of value. Anything else ends up on the rubbish heap. He auctions all the valuable stuff."
"Including books?"
"I expect so. I don't know."
"And you believe him trustworthy?"
"I would stake my life on it," said Pope firmly. "I'm not sure what you're driving at, but you have picked the wrong man in Harry. He is a committed Methodist and honourable in all his dealings. Now, please excuse me. I feel better and will return to my friends now,"
he continued, emphasizing the word friends, as he turned and re-entered the hotel. Lawrence was about to follow him when thoughts of Violet stopped him in his tracks. He would give anything to discuss the events of the evening with her. She didn't need to comment to keep him on track. A nod of her head or an occasional word of sage advice was good enough, and his instinct would pick up from there. He missed her, and the thought of going back to an empty room was too depressing to contemplate. He decided instead to walk to Scole and prevail upon Michael for companionship and a bed for the night. Chapter 38. Testing for Arsenic. Monday, May 27th, 1895. Once Michael overcame the surprise of Lawrence's unexpected visit, he greeted him warmly and welcomed him with a large glass of port and a good supper. Michael abandoned his plan to write to his brother that evening. Instead, they sat talking into the small hours about the case, speculating whether Violet had arrived in Overstrand yet. Michael had already offered his spare room to a friend, but his sofa was available. Lawrence accepted it and slept surprisingly well, waking at daybreak. He joined Michael at the table and they breakfasted on eggs and bacon before Lawrence returned to Dis. The sky was cloudless, and despite the early hour, the sun's rays were fierce. Lawrence was perspiring heavily by the time he returned to the Crown. He strolled through the hallway, almost bumping into George Panks, who shot him a withering look. Unabashed, Lawrence climbed the stairs, removing his jacket as he went, relieved to be free of the heavy clothing. He poured a jug of water into the blue and white porcelain basin, splashed his face, and toweled it dry. The cold, refreshing water made him feel thirsty, and Lawrence reached for the smaller drinking vessel by his bedside table, then poured himself a drink. He raised the scratched glass to his lips, then stopped at the sight of a hair floating in the liquid above a fine layer of sediment. He fished out the offending object and wiped it on his trouser leg before stopping to consider the implications of what he had just seen. A hair in a glass was unfortunate, but the fine white sediment below it was something else again. He sniffed the water. It was odorless and colourless. But for the presence of the stray hair, he wouldn't have looked twice at the contents. He swirled the water around and rechecked it. The substance had very nearly dissolved. For a moment, the temptation to put his finger in the liquid and taste it was overwhelming, but common sense prevailed. Instead, he sat down on the bed, trying to organize his thoughts. Yesterday he had deliberately and provocatively set out to display his suspicions publicly. Today he had found a strange substance in his drinking water. The connection between the two things was unavoidable, and he wasn't about to take a chance. He emptied the contents of his glass into the white ceramic jug and thrust the empty drinking vessel deep into the pocket of his trousers. Draping his coat over the water jug, he set off downstairs to find the helpfully insouciant Minnie Panks. 10 minutes later, he had gained enough information to know that Mr. Gosling, the chemist, would be at his home in Linden House. Lawrence walked the length of Denmark Street and entered Gosling's driveway at a lick of speed. Linden House was a handsome property set well back from the road. Lawrence climbed a small set of steps to reach the doorway located beneath a balustraded balcony. He rang the bell, and a young servant girl greeted him. She waved him through the door and left him alone in the spacious hallway while she went to fetch her master. Lawrence began to feel uncomfortable as he waited. It was one thing asking for an opinion in a drugstore, but quite another invading a gentleman's home. He needn't have worried. Thomas Gosling grasped the potential severity of the situation as soon as he had finished speaking. "You've come to the right place," said Gosling, reaching for the jug. "I'm almost retired, you know, but I have a small laboratory in the back of the house and more than enough equipment to conduct a marsh test." "Marsh test?" echoed Lawrence. "Yes," said Thomas Gosling, leading him through a corridor and into a room that smelled of sulphur. "It's as good a detector of arsenic as it was when they convicted Marie Lafarge in the 40s. "If you say so," said Lawrence, feeling out of his depth. "I'll tell you how it works if you like," said Gosling enthusiastically, reaching for a porcelain apparatus containing taps and tubes. He placed the device on top of a wooden table and carefully adjusted it. "We need one of these," he said, unscrewing a jar. He reached for a small pair of tongs and extracted an even smaller piece of metal, which he placed in one arm of the tube. "What is that?" asked Lawrence. "Zinc," said Gosling, "and this is sulphuric acid." He pointed to a cabinet, donned a pair of heavy gloves, and poured in the contents of the bottle. "Now, let's take a sample from your jug," he continued, decanting a small amount into the other arm. "One stopper," he said, producing a rubber bung, "and a short wait." He stepped back and stared at the device. "It doesn't seem to be doing much," said Lawrence. "That's because you can't see through the porcelain," said the chemist. "But rest assured that hydrogen is now building up in the short arm." He made a vague gesture towards the apparatus. "Water?" "Where?" "I mean, would you like a glass of water, as you were unable to drink yours earlier?" Lawrence faltered, unsure whether to accept, given his recent experience. "It's perfectly safe." "Yes, then," Lawrence muttered, feeling foolish. Thomas Gosling poured a glass and smiled as he passed it to Lawrence. "Thank you," said Lawrence, gulping it down. A clock chimed from outside the room, and the chemist looked up. "Is that the time? I must get on," he said. "Now for the clever bit." He struck a match, released a nozzle on the device, and ignited the gas. Then he opened a small drawer beneath the desk, took out a piece of glass, and placed it in the whitish flame. "Oh dear," he sighed as a brownish-black spot appeared. "Your suspicions were correct. There was arsenic in your water." By the time Lawrence returned to the Crown, the full implications of his narrow escape had set in. His fingers shook as he untied his cravat, and he sat down slowly on the bed, thankful for the stray hair that had saved his life. By rights, Lawrence should have slept at the Crown the previous night, and was in the habit of drinking water if woken up in the small hours. Had the arsenic been introduced before bedtime, which was likely, he could have gulped it down without seeing the contents. Lawrence shuddered at the thought of death by poison. He'd already witnessed the unendurable pain of a strychnine victim, and would never forget seeing the dying spasms of the poisoner's target during one of his first cases as a newly promoted inspector. The memory would haunt him forever. He bolstered his pillows and lay back, reclining against the bedstead while surveying the hotel room. The bedroom door was to his right and easily visible from the bed. It would be too risky for someone to interfere with his drinking water at night when he would be in the room. An intruder would be easy to see. In any case, he remembered drinking from the glass yesterday morning. The contamination must have occurred in the afternoon or early evening. It was most likely after he announced his suspicions to the Oddfellows, which implied their involvement. Equally, a member of the Panks family or their servants could have doctored his water. The keys were available from the recessed area of the hallway, and the front door to the Crown was open from early morning to late evening. Anyone could have walked in off the street, which opened up the possibility of further suspects. While musing upon that thought, Lawrence fell asleep. He awoke to a pang of hunger, and his stomach growled in response. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and if he didn't shake a leg, he would miss dinner too. Lawrence stood and walked towards the dressing table, where he picked up a comb and ran it through his hair. His reflection stared back, and he didn't like what he saw. The spray of grey at his temples had extended towards his ears. Faint vertical lines on his forehead suggested a perpetually worried man. He raised his eyebrows and watched the lines disappear, wishing that the change was permanent. It had been several months since he had last called upon his barber, and his hair needed a good cut. All in all, he did not feel his usual impeccably groomed self. As he turned away from the mirror, he spied a glint of metal on the floorboards near the bed. Lawrence peered more closely in case he had imagined it, but there was something on the floor. He walked towards the bed and stooped down, closing his hand over the object. Adrenaline coursed through his body as he opened his hand. In his palm was an object which looked like a chunk of metal, but was a cufflink with a symbol etched on top. The last time Lawrence had seen a similar symbol was inside the cupboard at the back of the Crown Hotel. It was a close match to one of the medallions from what he remembered, but Lawrence was by no means certain. He would have to go back and check, which might prove difficult in the middle of the evening. Patience was not his strongest virtue, but he was going to have to wait. In the meantime, he was starving. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Lawrence made his way to the dining room.